tell me ready, set, go? And it's go?
Yes.
Yes. All right. Good evening, council and staff, and those of us joining us out in, I guess, what I'm going to call Cyberville, to the July, what date am I? July 21st. 21, thank you. Council meeting, special council meeting. This electronic agenda is available on the town's website at greaternapanee.com and is being streamed to the public on the town's YouTube channel. The Municipal Conflict of Interest Act, the council's rules of procedure, bylaw, and code of conduct and other pertinent legislation apply to these electronic proceedings as if they were in person. I will do a roll call of the members of council, and then our clerk will do a statement of what town staff are online with us. If a member of council's connection to the meeting is interrupted, then I will call a short recess of the meeting until the member can reconnect either by internet or telephone. If the member is not able to reconnect within 5 minutes, the meeting will then resume. So, Councillor Johnson.
I'm here.
Councillor McCormack.
Here.
Councillor Norrie.
Here.
Councillor Pennell.
I am here.
Councillor Richardson.
Ward 2 present.
Deputy Mayor Kaiser.
I am here.
And the mayor is present. Susan, could we have a roll call for, or could we have a list of the members of staff that are with us this evening, please?
Yes, we have Raymond Callery, the CAO. We have Rob Sturson, who's General Manager of Emergency Services Fire Chief. We have Charles McDonald, who's Director of Operational Audits. We have Brianna Clement, who's the Community Engagement Clerk. Paul Dober is the General Manager of Financial Services Treasurer. We have Peter Dafo, who's the General Manager of Infrastructure Services. Brant Zoderberg, General Manager of Community and Corporate Services. We have Todd Harvey, who's Director of Utilities, and Michael Nobes, who's Director of Development Services.
Thank you, Susan. I will call the meeting to order. I've already told you where to access both the agenda and the YouTube. I will look for a motion to accept the agenda with some amendments, please. Be adopted. We need to amend it as follows. Remove agenda item 5.5-2, statements of interest for the new BIA members, and to add in closed session another matter regarding potential litigation and identifiable individuals, and a matter regarding identifiable individuals. With that, I would call for a motion. Deputy Mayor Kaiser, Councillor McCormack. Comments or questions? All in favor of the motion? Motion is carried unanimously. Thank you. Any disclosure of pecuniary interest and the general nature thereof? Seeing none. Public meetings under the Planning Act. I need a recommendation that the public meetings under the Planning Act be hereby convened. Moved by Deputy Mayor Kaiser, seconded by Councillor Johnson. All in favor of that motion? Motion is carried. Now we have Mr. Nobes on here with us. I will read what we are speaking to, and then I will let Michael come on along with Susan, who, if we have anyone who is speaking to this, that they will bring them into the screen. So 4.2 is a zoning amendment application, PLZACO 2020-010. The applicant is C. Smith. The location is 3256 County Road 11, parts of Lot 8 and 9, Concession 4, geographic Township of Richmond in the town of Greater Napanee. The effect would be that the zoning bylaw amendment will permit the agricultural use of the subject parcels, but prohibit the establishment of residential uses. Michael, would you like to speak to this or answer any questions that council may have, or bring anyone in that was wishing to speak to this for or against, please?
Through your worship, thank you. This application is connected with a previous consent application from 2019 that was previously approved. This is a condition of the consent that that the Committee of Adjustment imposed on that consent and is required to finalize the severance. It has the effect of prohibiting any future establishment of any residential use on the retained agricultural parcel. So if there are any questions of council, I'd be glad to address them. And Susan, if you have anybody in the in the queue to make any comments, then I guess they can come in at any time.
Susan, do we have anyone in the queue wishing to speak for or against this?
There are just a couple members that I'll just check to see if this application is one that they wish to speak to.
Thank you. In the meantime, any questions to Michael on the application?
No.
I think we're all pretty clear on it.
Okay, we just have one member that's connecting by phone.
Okay, thank you.
I'm not sure if this application is one that they're speaking to or not, but we can check with the person that's on the line.
It isn't.
Judging by the phone number that I see, I think it's Yuko Leclerc from FO10 who will be speaking about Millhouse Yards and that Gibbard rezoning. But we can confirm that.
No, I have Yuko coming on the
Okay.
computer.
Okay, we'll wait to confirm, see whether this person wishes to speak to it or not. This is the first time we've had to do this, so we'll see how it works. That's okay. We've learned a lot in the past almost 5 and 6 months.
Sorry, so the person that's on the line from the phone, is this an application that you're wishing to speak to? Not getting any response, so.
Okay, we will allow them to come back in the room with council's permission if they were wishing to speak to this. We don't deal with this other than the public meeting until we have bylaws at the end. Am I right there, Susan?
Yes, this is just for the public meeting.
Okay, all right. So with no response from the person that's on there, then we will go on to 4.3 zoning bylaw amendment. PLZACO 2020 026. The applicant is Millspring Farms. Location is 1951 Storey Street, part lots 24 and 25, concession 3, geographic Township of South Fredericksburgh, in the town of Greater Napanee. The effect of zoning bylaw amendment will restrict the use of the barn on the residential lot to non-agricultural purposes and the use of the remaining 43-hectare parcel to agriculture, prohibiting residential development thereon. Michael, I would think that this is the same as 4.2 for purposes.
That's correct.
Yeah, do we have, if there are questions of council, and then we can also check to see if there is anyone waiting online to speak to this bylaw amendment. Yeah, Deputy Mayor Kaiser.
I just wanted to ask about the term non-ag uses. The barn is being severed with the house, so it's not part of the fields and stuff, so that's why you're using that term? Or is it specific to livestock?
Correct. So it's not part of the retained larger agricultural parcel. So it does not have the rights for non-residential use. So the size of the parcel is such that it can only accommodate residential uses.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, sorry, Councillor Pennell.
Through your worship, thank you. I just have a statement and probably some direction will be needed. As I was reading the agenda, and I did reach out to get clarification on what was just spoke about non-agricultural use. This house happens to be listed for sale, and the listing agent has stated, how about this 2-story home with huge barns, ideal for a home business or hobby farm? This listing's been out there for 6 days now, and I want to see how we can approach either a listing agent or probably the owner to have this corrected, because we definitely don't want somebody to be sold a bill of goods that could not happen.
Through your worship, if I may, I can reach out to the owner directly tomorrow and voice those concerns. And within the bylaw itself, for that severed residential lot, it will be explicit that the barns are not to be used for farming purposes, only for residential accessory storage, essentially.
Okay, yeah, Councillor Pennell?
Thank you very much, Michael. I really appreciate that if you could do that, because although it's all going to be in the paper, when somebody, it's a very hot real estate market right now, and somebody's going to see this and buy it and then find out that they can't do what they wish. So I certainly appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Susan, we have no one in the queue waiting to speak to this?
No.
Okay, thank you. So on to 4.4, zoning bylaw amendment, PLZACO 2020-003. The applicant is ABNA Investments. The location is within Part Lot 23, Concession 2, geographic Township of Richmond. Property is legally described as parts lot 1, 2, 8, and 9 on the south side of Dundas Street. All of lots 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, south side of Dundas Street. Part of the unnumbered lot lying between lots 6 and 9, and part of the unnamed street lying between 5 and 6 Mill Reserve. Registered plan number 82, Town of Greater Napanee, County of Lennox and Addington. The property is located on the south side of Dundas Street and is municipally recognized as 88 Dundas Street East. The effect of the zoning bylaw amendment would permit minor alterations to the existing zoning in support of a mixed-use development on the subject lands. The environmental protection zoning will be maintained. Michael, and then I do believe that we do have someone else that will be coming in. Michael, did you wish to speak to this before the proponent comes in?
Your worship, the proponent will provide a very detailed overview of what the zoning relief is, what the requested zoning relief is, and that will be Yuko Leclerc from FO10.
Okay.
Council,
if you could note down any questions that you have, this is the first time we've tried this, so that we're not trying to go in and out all the time. If you could try to hold your questions till the end, if that's good with everyone. Okay, we will wait for the consultant to come into the room then, please.
Good evening, Your Worship.
Good evening.
My name is Yuko Leclerc. I'm a land use planner with FO10 Planning and Design, and I'm here to present this zoning bylaw amendment application on behalf of ABNA Investments Ltd. So what I anticipate doing here is, just for the benefit of everyone viewing and listening, is I'll give direction to the clerk and just ask for a next slide when I'm at that stage. I'll note before I move on to the next slide that this is an application for zoning bylaw amendment for the property known municipally as 88 Dundas Street East, which is the site of the Gibbard District project. This is a sort of a subsequent technical amendment following up on the previous official plan and zoning bylaw amendments that took place a few years ago. Next slide, please. Thank you. So on this slide, we just have an image showing sort of the higher level context around the subject property. You can see from this that the property is located in downtown Napanee. This is a brownfield site that was the site of the former Gibbard's Furniture Factory. It's well suited. It's close to a number of open spaces and schools. It's got this unique location between Dundas Street and the Napanee River across from Springside Park. Next slide, please. This slide, I've got an image showing the property, an aerial image that's much closer into the property. You can see the property at the last time that this aerial image was taken. So you can see it's a little bit out of date if you've been near the property in recent days or months. But generally speaking, this is a site that still contains a former furniture factory building, although a number of other sort of subsequent additions to that building have been removed. There's also the Pringle building, which is a former garage. There's an old brick mill down by the water and a brick smokestack as well. The lot area is about a little over 2 hectares. It's got approximately 300 meters of frontage on Dundas Street and a little over 400 meters of shoreline along the Napanee River. There is also a grade change. Obviously the land slopes down towards the Napanee River from Dundas Street east. And you can see at the sort of the bottom of this image to the south of the property is the water purification plant. And there's a sort of it's not necessarily a public road allowance, but there's a street that provides access to that treatment plant, which also would lead into the Gibber District site. Next slide, please. So there were a few previous land use planning applications that were approved by council, and there's a few applications that are ongoing. So I'll just recap those very briefly. Back in 2018, council approved applications for official plan and zoning bylaw amendment, which established the current policy and regulatory framework on the site. So the property was redesignated from industrial to central business district, and it was rezoned to the current C3-8 zone. Now this C3-8 zone is a unique zone for this property. It blends, it incorporates various elements, permitted uses, including residential apartment dwelling uses, as well as a wide range of sort of downtown commercial type uses that can be incorporated into the buildings that are proposed for the site. The site-specific zoning also introduced a number of performance standards to the property, new parking ratios, maximum limit on the amount of commercial gross floor area, and fairly unique to the town of Napanee is that this zoning introduced a what's called a height map, which is rather than providing setbacks for each of the buildings and trying to define, front yard, rear yard, the nature of the design of the site was a little bit more atypical. Multiple buildings on a property, incorporating existing and new buildings. So what we introduced and applied was what's called a height map, which set out very specific criteria on where certain heights could be permitted on the site. That central business district designation also applied a new maximum height to the site. It permitted a maximum height of 7 stories. There is an ongoing site plan control application. So subsequent to those land use change applications, we've been working on the detailed site plan control and site plan design. And those applications have gone through a few iterations. It's a fairly lengthy process for a site of this complexity with so many different moving parts. We are very close to providing our 4th submission to the town. We're about a day or so away from submitting that. So we're well advanced in the detailed design of the site plan. And that's one of the reasons that I'm here this evening, is that through that detailed design exercise, we found that there are a few elements of the zoning that we need to change. There is also a conditional building permit for below grade works related to building 1 that I believe has been issued. And then our architect and the sort of the interior design and structural engineering team are working on applications for a building permit for the above grade works at building 1. And that building permit application is also going to be submitted soon. Next slide, please. Thank you. Under the current policy framework, so I've noted that there was this land use change that changed the designation to central business district. There's also a portion of the shoreline that's designated environmental protection, and that's what you're seeing on this slide here. As part of the official plan amendments, we also incorporated a site-specific policy which allowed a maximum height of 7 stories across the site. This land use change was found to be consistent in conformity with the provincial policy statement, and town council approved it for that reason. Next slide, please. This slide, we're showing the current zoning. So I've spoken to some of the parameters in the site-specific zone. So there's a height map, there's different uses. There are a number of performance standards as well. It's a fairly detailed zone. It's a few pages in the zoning bylaw, so I'm not going to go through all of those provisions. That's the current framework. What I've listed on this slide, though, for the committee's benefit is the amendments, is the provisions that we're seeking to amend. So these are the current standards that apply. There's parking stall sizes. There's the standard size of 3 meters by 6 meters, some standard parking stall sizes. We also have the height map established a maximum height for the mill building of 16 meters. So all of these are the components of the zoning bylaw, the site-specific zoning that we're seeking to amend tonight. Next slide, please. So as I've just said, the intent of this application, it's really driven by the detailed design. As the architect and our team has been working through the technical components of the site, we found that there's a few things that we need to shift around. So one of the components is the parking stall size. When we designed the site originally, we had anticipated that all of the parking spaces would be compliant with the standard requirement in the bylaw. And what we found is that although our underground parking stall sizes can meet that requirement, we need a little bit of relief for the surface parking spaces. We're asking to reduce those, the dimension of those, and I'll provide that dimension in a moment, to provide a little bit more flexibility and allow the surface parking areas to be a little bit more efficient. So it really comes down to making better use of the space at the surface. And because we're asking to amend the standard parking stall sizes, we're also asking to amend the barrier-free sizes. And again, that's really to ensure that there's a consistent parking stall length along in the parking areas. The amendments that we're proposing are consistent with what the Accessibility for Ontarians for Disabilities Act, or with Disabilities Act, allows. So it's completely consistent with that legislation, and it's the parking stall sizes that we're asking for are ones that we've seen used in other municipalities, in particular Kingston and Ottawa. I'll note we're also asking to amend the height map, and I'll explain that a little bit more when I get to the site plan. Fundamentally, the plan hasn't changed, but what we found is that some of the building footprints need to be adjusted, and the height map provides some flexibility and a little bit of a buffer, but the changes that we need to incorporate into the height map are a little bit greater than that buffer allows, so we need to amend the height map. And one of the components of the height map that we need to amend is the maximum height for the mill building. Next slide, please. So this is just I guess a version of the site plan as it was at the latest site plan submission. So this is as part of our third site plan submission. This is how the plan looked. And for those familiar with the originally approved plan, there's no obvious differences between this plan and that one. One difference that's come up is that we're no longer proposing to use the Pringle building. That building is proposed to be demolished now, and that's allowed a little bit more flexibility in terms of things like the commercial floor area and the parking requirements for commercial uses. We've also found that there is opportunity for more underground parking than we had initially thought. So the original plans had only anticipated one level of underground parking, but through the excavation work that's been done and the explorations of the site, we found that we can actually accommodate 3 levels of underground parking, which means that most of the parking can go underground. But for convenience, in particular for a lot of the commercial users of the property, we're still asking for 2 surface parking lots. Very small ones, but at grade to provide a little bit more convenience access. And those are shown on this plan on the left-hand side. One is down by the mill building, and then the other is right at Dundas Street. There's a parking lot right there now, a small one that provides access to the Gibbard, to the sales office. And we're asking to maintain that lot, formalize it a little bit. So one of the reasons we need a zoning bylaw amendment for the height of the mill building is that we found that the original height map had used an assumed finished floor elevation for that building. And when we undertook more detailed work, we found that assumed height wasn't going to work, and we needed a slightly different finished floor elevation. That in combination with examining the structural components of the roof has led us to conclude that we need a little bit more height on the mill building. So rather than the original 16-meter height, we're asking to increase the height to 18 meters. It's not sufficient of an increase to allow a whole other level to be built. It's just enough to allow the building to be used as it's intended, and to provide a sort of a modest peak to the roof that has significant benefits from a structural engineering perspective. Next slide, please. So on this slide, I'm showing the height map. So one of the reasons that we do a height map for a site like this, it's multiple buildings, it's a lot of different things going on. But if the zoning allows a maximum height of seven stories, we didn't want it to have that as a blanket permission, and neither did the town. I think there was a desire to see see some restriction on what could be built. So what this height map does is it very precisely defines where the height can go. What portions of the site can be 7 meters, what portions can be 2 meters, can be 7 stories, what portions can be 2 stories, et cetera. And you can see the building design is this kind of staggered footprint. And what happened over the course of the past year and a half is that the number of steps in that stagger in building 2 decreased, and that meant that the building no longer complied with the footprint in the height map as it was originally proposed. So that's another reason that we're asking to amend the height map, is just to ensure that the building footprint fits within the planned height map for the site. It's driven by very technical sort of changes that have happened to the site. Now, it doesn't fundamentally change what's been approved and what the intention is for the development. So it's really implementing the original vision for the site and allowing us to do so. Next slide, please. So this slide is effectively recapping what I've just said for the past couple of minutes. It provides the details. So the specific parking stall sizes, we're asking for them to be 2.6 by 5.2 meters with an area of 13.5 square meters. For the accessible parking spaces, we're asking for their widths to be 3.4 for a type A space and then 2.6 meters for a type B space. Those are well within what they're actually higher than what the AODA requires. And then the maximum length would be 5.2 meters. Similarly, the access aisle that has to be shared next to its parking spaces would be reduced in length. We're asking to amend the height of the mill building and the height map. And that's fun. That's the extent of the application as it stands today. And with that, I'll just note that these are amendments that are intended to improve the efficiency of the site and ensure that the user needs are met. It's consistent with the provincial policy statement. It conforms to the county and town official plans. And although we're continuing to work through the site plan design, and there may be very minor adjustments to the proposed zoning bylaw amendment between now and when it returns to council for a decision, the application that's presented this evening is fundamentally what we're asking for. And with that, I would welcome any questions or comments from the committee or the public.
Okay, council, any questions? Councillor McCormack.
Your worship, I'd just like to know the underground parking, will it have one floor access that's going to be quite high to accommodate delivery, vehicles, larger trucks and so on? And will residents who end up living there, will they be able to access the underground parking with full-size vehicles like pickup trucks, which we have a lot of in the area?
Through your worship, the answer to the question about loading is that loading is all intended to be at the surface. So there are a few different loading areas on the site. If it's possible to bring up the site plan, I can identify where these are. There's one located sort of on the north side of building 2, and then there's a couple of loading spaces to the south of building 1. But the height of the underground parking garage is going to be at least 2.1 meters in order to comply with accessibility requirements. And I suspect it's going to be a little bit taller than that. So it will be enough to accommodate pickup trucks and so on. So including sort of larger pickups. So that has absolutely been considered in the design and engineering of the underground parking. The underground parking is also intended to be split so that the first level of underground parking is for the exclusive use of residents, people that are living on the site. And then the other 2 levels, the second and third levels of underground parking, they're going to be a little bit smaller, and those are going to be for commercial users, primarily staff, but also clientele.
All right, thank you.
Any further questions of council? Okay, Deputy Mayor Kaiser and then Councillor Canal.
Thank you, Your Worship. 2.1 meters in the underground parking. Will Nate Dornekamp fit in there? I'm just being a joke. I had 2 questions about the application when it comes to the smaller parking spaces. Did I understand correctly that the reduced size is really only intended for the 2 surface lots, that the underground spots will still conform to the original 3.4 by 6 meters?
Madam Worship, excuse me, that's correct. The reason for that is that when the site was originally laid out, we had laid out all of the parking areas at the 3 by 6 and advanced that through 1 or 2 rounds of technical review through site plan control, and that was factored into the structural engineering and the design of the building. So the underground parking, there's structural pillars that are spaced in accordance with those parking stall sizes. So even if we wanted to reduce the parking stall sizes in the underground parking garage, we're too far along the engineering design of the site to do that. But what it allows us to do is it allows us to use the two surface parking lots that we're proposing a little bit more efficiently and provide a little bit more space in those areas. And it also allows us to accommodate a barrier-free space down by the mill building at the surface.
Okay, that's really all I had to ask. If the underground space is still conformed to the original dimensions, then we're only talking a few supplementary spaces anyways, maybe for guests or visitors. So not too concerning, but thank you.
Councillor Pennell?
Thank you, Worship. I just have a question, again, going back to parking, seems to be a hot topic here. With the reduction of the sizes of parking, are you also, is this to obviously to fit your design? So are you reducing the amount of parking spots as well? And the reason why I asked that is that in the study, it says that there was considering the time of day distribution of peak parking demands and actual utilization of parking surrounding the subject. I'm just wondering if you were going to rely on off-site parking around the area with the reduction of parking spots, if that is true. Yes, I think that's all I have for right now.
Through you, Your Worship, and I appreciate this question because that was absolutely a component that was explored with the original applications. We knew originally that with only one level of underground parking, we were going to have to provide off-site parking. But through those investigations and the ability to provide those 2 additional levels of underground parking, we know that we no longer need off-site parking, and we also don't need to reduce the parking requirement for either the residential or the users. So we're going to be meeting or exceeding the requirement in all cases.
Through your worship, that is fantastic. Thank you very much for that answer. Thank you.
Any further questions or comments of council? No. Okay. Sorry, Councillor McCormack.
Yes, Your Worship. I'm just curious again as to the height of the pickup trucks, because just as an example, I'm 6'2" and I can't see above the cab of my truck. So I just did a quick research here, and it appears that my truck would be 77 inches. And this 2.whatever meters is 72 inches, thereabouts. So just if we can get reassured on this.
Your Worship, I'm just on my end here. I'm trying to pull up a cross section of the underground parking. If you'll bear with me a moment. From what I can tell, it looks like the underground parking levels are going to be in the range of 3 meters. So they're going to be quite a bit more. The 2.1 meter figure that I threw out was the requirement for accessible parking. That's the minimum requirement for vertical clearance, I believe, for accessible parking, and we're going to be complying with that. But I do know that our underground parking is actually going to be quite a bit in excess of that. And if council will bear with me for a moment, I'll try and find that figure. Here we are. So we are looking at a 3 meter difference in height from one level to the next. So that's about 1 full story at each parking level, which is I think more than enough for most vehicles and individuals as well.
All right, I don't want to spend too much time on it, but we could have this noted as something that should be looked into, and it would be really sad to opening day, people realize that what they're driving currently won't fit in the underground parking. We run into this in different locations, and since this is brand new, I think it's important.
Okay, if so perhaps what I might recommend is that through Michael, before this process goes too much further, if we could just have the requirements of providing different heights of parking, whether it's restrictive in one area or the other, and also what the actual parking areas, whether it's height and certainly square meters. I guess I can't say square footage, although I'd like to. What the requirements would be, just to satisfy council and the public that it is something that's certainly going to meet whatever the standards are that are set out for both accessibility and types of vehicles. Is that possible, Michael, to follow up on, please?
Yes, Your Worship, absolutely. I'm just looking at the architectural drawings for the parking garage structure, and from finished floor to underside of deck, it is looking like the smallest dimension is approximately 2.3 meters at a ramp, but then enlarges to 2.65 meters. So it looks like there should be ample room. That is for parking levels P2 and P3. However, the smallest dimension for P1, which is the primary residential area, the smallest dimension is 2.55 meters, with the rest being roughly 3 meters in height. So it looks like we'll be okay, but however, we will certainly verify and bring that back to council for the decision meeting.
Yeah.
Okay.
If I could just weigh in just one more time. If at the ramp it's 2.3 meters, it doesn't matter how high it is past the garage door, because you have to clear that first.
Okay, we will certainly verify that and bring that back to council for at the decision meeting.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you. Anything further of council? Councillor Pennell?
Thank you, through your worship. Could we just have an explanation on the growth commercial floor area? I see that there's also a request to amend the maximum commercial gross floor area permitted on site shall be 3,200 square meters, and that's being adjusted to 3,734. Just wondering what that was about.
Through you, your worship, that's the application has actually been amended to take that out. We are no longer asking to increase the commercial GFA. That ask was in there originally because of the combination of the Pringle building, which was going to be developed as a commercial use, and then some additional, and then the floor area in the mill building and in the main in building 2. So what we've found is that by removing the Pringle building, we don't actually need to amend the commercial floor area, and the site plan that we're working with at this time is fully in compliance with the maximum 3,200 square meter.
Okay, thank you for that. I guess that's my mistake. I just received this in our package, and I see now that the date was December 23rd, 2019. So I apologize for that question. Thank you.
If there is nothing further, I do have our clerk saying that we have someone else who wishes to come in to speak to this. Please, Susan, I'll allow you to let Mark enter, please.
I believe Mark Tao from IBI Group is there and wishes to speak.
Okay, certainly. Mark, welcome.
Thank you. Hey, yeah, so just Mark Tao, IBI Group, planning consultant for the town. I was just going to speak to the parking garage height clearance issue. So this is a fairly standard parking height allowance that we see commonly throughout parking structures, underground parking structures, etc. 2.1 meters is a common clearance height to be allowed in parking structures. So certainly we've been involved with a number, whether it's Homestead in Kingston or elsewhere, and they seem to function well. Certainly elevated pickup trucks or other non-stock or non-standard vehicles may have trouble, but that nonetheless is kind of is a standard, and it's typically partly a matter of the function of the structural design, but also partly a function of some of the mechanical limitations that might be in underground garages. And so just the end result being that they are approved regularly at that height, and they seem to function well without issue in many other developments. So if that's of comfort to council, just wanted to offer that as well.
Thank you, Mark, and I'm sorry I didn't know that you were in the room with us. Any questions that you would like directed to Mark, who is with IBI and representing the town on this from council, while you have the opportunity? Nope, seeing none. I haven't got everybody on my screen, so.
Councillor Johnson has her hand up.
Okay, yeah, she's not on my screen. So Susan, could we take down the slide? Thank you very much. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Mayor. I think I just wanted to point out that although the parking concerns are realistic, especially when you own a pickup truck, and we do, and there's parking garages that we can't go into, this is not public parking. This is the parking for the tenants of the building. And as long as they are aware of what the restrictions are when they buy in to their properties, and they recognize that these are, unfortunately, in this day and age, parking spots are getting smaller and smaller. One suggestion I would have is perhaps you could find places to do parking for tiny cars, and that might free up parking spots that are a little larger for oversized vehicles, especially considering that some of the tenants would be seniors and might need to open their car doors a little wider than the small spaces would allow for. But I don't think this is a concern with moving the project forward.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Johnson. Anything further from council? Okay, thank you both for coming into the room and helping us through this. We will move on to 4.4 zoning bylaw amendment, next page. 4.5 official plan amendment, zoning bylaw amendment, and plan of subdivision applications, PLOPMA 2020-014. And PLZACO 2020-015, as well as PLSUBD 2020-013. The applicant is James Selkirk Custom Homes. The location, the property is legally described as all of lots 45 and 46, registered plan number 1175, and all of lots 1 to 23, both inclusive, all of lots 25 to 54, both inclusive, all of blocks 56 and 57, all of Rose Court, Heritage Park Drive, Anglia Street, registered plan number 1176, all in the town of Greater Napanee and the county of Lennox and Addington. The effect is the applications would permit the subject lands to be developed with a residential subdivision containing a mix of low, medium, and high density built forms, as well as the creation of new public roads, park space, stormwater management facilities. Michael, did you wish, and is there anyone that, yes, there are people that are coming in the room for this. Michael, did you wish to speak to this? Then I will go to the public that are wishing to speak to it, and then I'll have council go with questions, please.
So, Your Worship, I believe that Mr. Leclerc did have a presentation prepared for this application as well. So I think if we let him proceed through that, then we can turn it over for further questions from there.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So we'll have the presentation first, please.
Thank you, Your Worship, and good evening once again. My name is Yuko Leclerc. I am a land use planner with Foten Planning and Design. I'm here representing the applicant, James Selkirk Custom Homes, with respect to the applications for draft plan of subdivision, official plan amendment, and zoning bylaw amendment, as noted by yourself. I'll note as well that I'm joined this evening by James Selkirk, who is the applicant, and Murray Jocelyn, who is our civil engineer. Next slide, please. This slide, I've got an image showing sort of an aerial with a 600-meter radius around the subject site. And what this is effectively showing is where the site falls within the town of Napanee. So it's kind of in the northern portion of the urban area. It's fairly close to the 401 as the crow flies, a little bit further away to the on-ramp to the 401. It is it's fairly close to the Napanee River. There are a number of parks nearby. It's about 1 kilometer from the downtown. And it is surrounded by existing development on 3 sides. And I'll note here that the existing development is primarily sort of lower density residential forms to the south, and then higher density forms to the north. Next slide, please. On this slide, it's similarly an aerial image, but it's much closer into the property. What this is showing is at a much greater level of detail what the surrounding land uses are. So you can see from this slide what I was saying, that there's lower density forms, in this case to the east and then to the south, and then higher density forms to the north. There's a commercial convenience store at the intersection of Newburgh Road and Camden Road, which is just to the northwest of the property. This total site area is about 6.25 hectares, or about 15.5 acres. These are lands that were previously registered as a plan of subdivision. So there was a subdivision agreement and the lots were created back in about 1991 as Plan 1176. A few years ago, council deemed the land to no longer be a subdivision, which effectively is a planning act process that takes away that division that was granted through final plan of subdivision, and it took away that lot fabric that had been created through the plan of subdivision and resulted in about 6 separate parcels that were conveyed to the applicant recently. Now the subject lands they have frontage on a few different roads. There's a small bit of frontage on Camden Road, frontage along Ginger Street, and then at the intersection of Ginger and Angela Street, and as well at the intersection of Ginger and Heritage Park Drive. So those 4 different access points or frontages are incorporated into the subdivision design, as you'll see when I get to that component of this presentation. Next slide, please. So before I get to the specifics of the presentation, I'll just briefly touch on the county and town official plans, and then on the current zoning. So I'll note that the subject lands are in the urban area designation of the County of Lennox and Addington official plan. This is a designation that allows, that encourages urban area to be developed. It encourages a range of housing options as well. And it really recognizes that this is the service boundary of Napanee, and there's going to be a broad range of uses therein. And it effectively just encourages that continued efficient use of the service boundary. Next slide, please. Under the town's current official plan, the lands are subject to 2 designations. So most of the subject lands are designated low density residential. And then there's a small portion at the north of the site, which is designated medium density residential. The official plan provides a lot of direction for the logical use of land, encouraging the efficient use of land and infrastructure, providing a range and mix of housing, where there's a gradation of density, or where there's a range of residential densities proposed. There should be a gradation. That there shouldn't be a mixture of high and medium and low just sort of peppered in throughout. There should be sort of a logical progression from low to higher. I'll note here before I move on as well that the medium density thresholds in the official plan are effectively, the official plan sets out 3 sort of categories of residential density, which are based on units per net hectare, which is a sort of a higher level form of assessing density. Low density residential is below 30 units per net hectare. Medium density residential is between 30 and 60. And then high density residential in the official plan is everything from 60 to 120 units per net hectare. So those are the 3 thresholds that we're working with. Next slide, please. The current zoning on the site is in place, and it was put in place at the same time that the land was subdivided as part of the draft plan of subdivision approvals. And that's, I think you can see that in the way that the zoning boundaries are, in the way that the underlying lot fabric, which you can see on this plan by the gray lines, is represented. So the way that the original subdivision zoned the land, the southernmost portion was zoned R1, which is a lower density residential zone that allows single attached dwellings. The central portion of the site was zoned open space to accommodate sort of parkland and stormwater management features. And then gradually moving north, immediately to the north of the open space zone was an R4 zone, which allowed a little bit more range, everything from single attached houses to semi-detached houses or duplexes. So a little bit more density was permitted. And then at the immediate north, where the land is designated medium density residential, it was zoned R6-4, which is a site-specific high-density residential zone that allows apartment dwellings, low-rise apartment dwellings, but apartment dwellings nonetheless. And I think one of the components that I want to just identify here is that the original subdivision plan had identified 2 unconnected road networks on the subject land. So there would have been a loop of Heritage Park Drive connecting to Camden Drive, and then to the north, Angela Street would have looped back to Ginger Street, and then the open space portion in the middle would have completely separated those two roads. Next slide, please. So the intent of the application that's before council and the public tonight is to reintroduce a subdivision on these lands, but with a little bit greater efficiency, a little bit higher unit count, a little bit more efficient use of the land, and improve network connectivity in terms of the road infrastructure, as well as relocating the location of the stormwater management and parklands on the land. So the goal here is to divide the land into 103 lots and 5 blocks. Now, those 103 lots consist of 38 single detached houses on basically singles on 30-foot lots. 63, what I'm going to try and refer to consistently as street front dwelling houses. These are effectively townhouses or road dwellings. The terminology is all more or less interchangeable, but the reason that I'm saying street front dwelling house is because the zoning bylaw for the town of Greater Napanee uses that terminology to identify road dwellings that front onto a street. So in the zoning bylaw, road dwellings are a defined term that actually don't have to front onto a street, whereas street front dwellings have to. So the intent here is that all of the townhouses are going to front onto street, so are going to front onto public streets. So we're going to refer to them as street front dwelling houses to be consistent with the zoning bylaw. So we're proposing a sort of a gradation from the south to the north of lower density residential uses to sort of higher density townhouses to higher density apartment dwelling houses at the northernmost portion of the site. And that's reflected by the colors of the plan here. So there's 2 apartment dwelling lots that are proposed. Each would have about 32 units, but we are asking through the planning approvals to allow a little bit more than that. And I'll discuss that a little bit more in a few minutes. And one of the components of this plan that I think is really significant is the relocation of the stormwater management block. So one of the things that we learned in evaluating the site and looking at its technical requirements is that the site actually slopes from the north down to the south and southeast. So there's about 4.5 meter change in elevation from the top to the lowest point of the site. And the lowest point of the site's at the south. So given just the way that the water flows, it made a lot more sense from a civil engineering perspective to situate the stormwater pond at more or less at the lowest portion of the subject lands. And that's one of the reasons why the stormwater management pond is located at the bottom corner there, at the southwest corner. It also integrates well with some of the other green space. So the park is intended to be and proposed to be in that location. There's an existing water course down that crosses the southern part of the site. It basically runs from a culvert to the west into the stormwater management infrastructure that was installed as part of the previous subdivision approvals in the late 80s and early 90s. And that water course is revegetated over time, and it's now, it's more established. So we're proposing to maintain that water course in its current state and maintain some vegetated buffers around it. So there's going to be a lot of green space, and by combining all of the different green spaces together, the plan basically makes it so that there's one substantial area of green space, which is more than each of them individually would provide. We are also asking, as is typical for a plan of subdivision, to proceed in phases. So the intention is to obtain draft approval for the entire subdivision, and then the applicant would proceed with final subdivision approval, which is the detailed technical review and then the pre-servicing in phases. The original submission that we provided discussed 3 phases, and then through our second submission, which was provided earlier this summer in response to the first round of technical comments that we received, we're actually asking to break that out into an additional phase. So we're asking we're proposing to proceed in 4 different phases, driven by a combination of sort of market factors and servicing needs. Next slide, please. So I've spoken a bit about the green space. This slide here is really just illustrating conceptually how the green spaces could function. So what we're seeing here is at the northernmost portion of the site is a mid-block connection that would link the green space to Street A, which is the street that would link Heritage Park Drive to Camden Road. And the purpose of that block, that connection is sort of two or threefold. It's to provide a pedestrian connection to the green space. Another is to provide a vehicular connection for service vehicles that where town staff are inspecting the stormwater pond. They would use that connection there. And it also provides a location for the underground infrastructure. So the stormwater drainage from the subdivision is going to drain into the pond through this block. So there's going to be some subsurface infrastructure there as well. As part of the subdivision development, we're proposing just over 0.4 hectares of parkland, so a little over an acre, which would front onto Heritage Park Drive. And you can see that portion on this plan. It's shown as block, I believe, 105, which has that pathway leading to the right, to the east, which is where Heritage Park Drive is. There's actually two separate portions of parkland that are shown here. So there's that one there, and then there's another one to the south of this thick dark green band. So that thick dark green band in the middle is what I was discussing previously. That's the vegetated buffer around that water course. And it's proposed to be kept in as vegetated a state as possible. And that's in order to satisfy some of the comments that we've had from the Conservation Authority. But what we're showing here, and the reason that we're showing this conceptual sort of pathway throughout the site is to show that there's a real great opportunity here to provide a linkage between all of these green spaces, and further to provide a linkage across that southernmost strip of parkland to the townhouses that exist to the south. And that connection was suggested by town staff through the round of technical review, and it was incorporated into this. But we also acknowledge, of course, that the actual programming and design of the park is going to be undertaken by town staff over time and in the future. And, you know, there's an opportunity here for a mix of passive programming as well as a little bit of active programming. But the question of how the park's going to be used is one that staff will be, I think, looking more closely at over time. We're not, as part of the development, the developer is not designing and programming the park. That'll be a town activity. But we're just trying to sort of suggest how the park could be used if it's used in this fashion. Next slide, please. So in order to support this application, we've had a number of technical studies done. And I asked the council to forgive me. I am going to go through these, not in detail, but I think there's some value in touching on each of these studies very briefly. We'll start with the archaeological assessment. There was a stage 1 and 2 completed. And that archaeological assessment found that there was no archaeological potential. They didn't find any elements of significance. That report was submitted to the ministry, and it was entered into the provincial register. So it's been effectively cleared of any archaeological potential. We also had a geotechnical investigation completed initially, and then over the course of the winter. So we submitted this application back, I believe, in December, and then over the course of the winter and spring, the geotechnical engineer had installed monitoring wells on the site and was able to go and take measurements of the groundwater levels over the sort of the wettest part of the year. And the reason that we did that is that we knew going into this process that there have been comments and concerns from the community and from technical staff as well, that the groundwater levels in this area might be high. So as part of the geotechnical investigation, we confirmed the bedrock depth, the elevation of groundwater. The geotechnical report also provided a number of detailed recommendations that are very technical, dealing with how to deal with the foundations and excavations. And then with their ongoing measurements that they took, they were able to confirm which parts of the site have sort of higher ground level, where the groundwater level is shallow with respect to the surface. And they did find that there are some portions of the site where the groundwater level can be as shallow as 1 meter below grade. And that's important for reasons that I'll come back to in a moment when we talk about the stormwater management report. And I'll note again, the stormwater management or the groundwater measurements undertook there were actually 5 different readings taken over the spring, basically between March and June. So we have some very robust data to work with. We had a noise impact study completed as well. The noise study looked at sources of noise, primarily traffic or transportation noises and point sources. There weren't any point sources identified in the vicinity, but what the noise study found is that, with CN, the CN rail nearby, with the 401, and then with Camden and Newburgh Road, the roads themselves aren't really a source of much noise, but the CN rail provides enough of a source of noise that there are some recommendations that came out of the noise study that certain lots need to have forced air, so they need to have ventilation so that they can close their windows if noise levels become problematic. And then most of the lots in the subdivision would have warning clauses, effectively notifying property owners that they are close to a rail line and that there is a possible source of noise. But what the study also found is that the noise levels are not so high that just standard Ontario Building Code building materials are sufficient to mitigate that noise, so that when you're inside a house and with the windows closed in particular, that there's no noise impact whatsoever. We had a few environmental site assessments completed as well. So we had a phase 1 environmental site assessment completed, which found that there had been a bus maintenance facility to the north of the site. There was a lubricating oil spill at that property back in 1990, and that had been remediated, but the study wasn't able to sort of set their hands on that remediation data. So they recommended a phase 2. We had the phase 2 completed, and the phase 2 looked at soil and groundwater. And it found that the main sort of thing to note is that there was some hydrocarbons in the water at sort of the point of the site that's closest to that bus terminal, but the levels weren't super high, but they were high enough to note. And what the ESA recommended is just to keep monitoring it. It's anticipated that over time, natural processes in the soil will break down those hydrocarbons. So just to maintain a monitoring program and annual sampling and just check in on how those processes are going. Our civil engineer completed a servicing report, which effectively found that the water and sanitary and other servicing components of the site, hydro, telecommunication, and gas can all be accommodated, and it provided recommendations about how to do so. Given the site's configuration, if there is a little bit of frontage of the site on Camden Road, and it's proposed that Street A would connect at Camden Road. Well, that intersection is actually sort of in between 2 existing houses that have existing driveways. So those driveways are close to the new road and where that property is. So one of the components that the county asked us to look at closely was the sight line and turning radii at that intersection to ensure that they meet requirements. And our traffic engineer looked at that and found that the intersection sight distance at the intersection of Street A and Camden Road complies with standard requirements, and that there is enough, the intersection has been designed so that there's enough separation distance between the stop sign and the stop bar on Street A and the traveled portion of Camden Road, that there's always going to be enough room for vehicles to ensure that they have sufficient sight distances down Camden Road in order to safely merge with traffic. We did have a species at risk assessment completed early on, and what that assessment did was it looked at the natural heritage characteristics of the site. The study looked at, there was a small wet area on the property, but it doesn't have any any significant ecological functions from a provincial perspective. The site itself is generally it was originally farmland, and then it was generally vegetated with primarily invasive species, and that there aren't any suitable habitats for species at risk on the property. The risk to species at risk is very low, and the ecologist that we work with is a fairly conservative fellow, and that's not terminology that we always see, that it's very low. He's generally a little bit more qualified, and we'll say, things like low risk, but in this case, his opinion is that this is an area where it's surrounded by urban environments. It's made up of invasive species. So the ecological function is really not significant in terms of the province. But being an ecologist, he also made some recommendations to ensure to sort of further mitigate any natural heritage impacts. And what the ecologist is recommending is that tree clearing and clearing of the site take place during certain times of the year, so that there's minimal impact to birds during the breeding season. Our stormwater management report was also prepared by a civil engineer. I think one of the significant components of this stormwater management report is that it identified that there is about a little over 4 hectares of land adjacent to the site, so to the west and to the north, which is currently uncontrolled. It's just draining in an uncontrolled fashion. So onto the subject lands. And what the stormwater design has done is that it's oversized the stormwater pond to incorporate all of those other lands. So the stormwater design that we have, the stormwater pond, which is proposed to be a wet pond, is actually going to drain the subdivision development, as well as the 4.3 hectares of land adjacent to the north. So it's draining more than just the subdivision development. And I'll let the civil engineer address any questions about that later, but I'll note that one of the components of the subdivision's stormwater management infrastructure is that it's been situated at an elevation that's below that elevation of the groundwater. So what it's anticipated and what it's designed to do is to drain the level of groundwater down to the level of that stormwater management infrastructure when it's installed, and then to maintain it at that level. So the stormwater design is actually intended to take the current level of groundwater and bring it further down. So that's, I think, substantial and very important element of the design of the entire subdivision. And the engineer has also designed an additional 10% capacity into the subdivision design, or into the stormwater design, to accommodate for climate change risks and sort of unknown factors into the future. So this has been a very robustly designed stormwater management system for a few different reasons. And then finally, in terms of the technical components, we had a traffic impact study done. And what the traffic impact study effectively concluded is that, over the course of sort of the study period, the amount of traffic generated by the site is not anticipated to be substantially more than what the background growth of traffic level is anticipated to be. So effectively what it's saying is that there's going to be some increase in traffic as a result of just the town's growth over time. And there's not enough traffic generated by the subdivision development to have an impact on those traffic levels. So all of the existing intersections, including the newly proposed intersections, are all going to function more or less as they would whether this subdivision happens or not. Of course, with the exception of the new subdivision, the new intersections, which are actually anticipated to provide a little bit more dispersion of traffic than what is currently available. So those are the technical studies. The planning rationale report provides kind of a review of the planning policy framework, and I'm more or less summarizing that as we go. So I'm not going to discuss that in any more detail right now. Thank you. We are asking for a draft plan of subdivision approval, which would allow the creation of the lands. We're also asking for an official plan amendment. And there's sort of 3 fundamental components to this official plan amendment. One is that we're asking to change the low density residential designation on the lands to medium density residential. And that's to allow the street front dwelling houses, because those units have an approximate density of about 35 units per net hectare. So they exceed the threshold for low density. But we also need that for the single detached dwellings. Because we're proposing these 30-foot singles, they're very, very efficient. They actually exceed the threshold for low density as well. So even to allow the single detached houses on the subdivision, we would need an official plan amendment because of the efficiency that we're proposing. So that's why we're asking to change that designation. We're also asking to change the medium density designation at the north to allow the 2 proposed apartment dwelling houses, so the 2 apartment buildings. And there's that amendment that we're asking is actually is the current zoning on those lands allows higher density than the current land use designation in the official plan allows. So the official plan amendment that we're asking for would actually bring the current zoning into conformity of the official plan where it's not currently. And what we're, as part of that official plan amendment, we're recognizing that the maximum density that would be allowed to be 120 units per net hectare on those 2 blocks. Now, in order to allow the high density residential of those 2 apartment blocks, there is a policy in the official plan that says that that high density uses have to be located on arterial or collector roads. So we're asking for a special policy area to allow it in this location because it's a local street. And the reason that's appropriate, and we feel that that's appropriate, is that although it's technically on a local street, it's a local street that is very close to an arterial road, Newburgh Road to the north, and there's not a lot of neighborhood traffic infiltration needed to bring vehicles in from that higher order of road to this one. There's an apartment, vehicles coming in would actually not drive in front of any individual houses. They would drive alongside a few lower density houses on Ginger Street and on Church Street, but they wouldn't actually drive in front of any individual houses. They would just be driving in front of the existing apartment building. So it's felt to be an appropriate land use change and an appropriate special policy area given the unique characteristics of the site in that regard. Thank you. Next slide. So we're asking for a few different zones on the subject lands. We are asking for a site-specific R5-X zone. That's the zone that would allow the single detached houses and the street front dwelling houses. And rather than allowing a lower density type of residential zone and introducing these higher density residential uses, we're asking to allow a higher density residential zone and then permit some lower density uses. So that's why we're asking to incorporate single detached and semi-detached dwellings into this zone, is because this is a zone that already allows street front dwelling houses. It allows road dwellings and so on. So we're ensuring that the zone would allow the whole range of uses that are permitted or that are proposed within the subdivision that's captured within this area. We're asking to amend a few different provisions, including minimum lot area, and that's to allow the lot fabric that's proposed. By removing the requirement, we're really relying on other parameters such as minimum lot frontage, yard setbacks, minimum landscaped open space to ensure that the lots are still developed appropriately. But this is an approach that we take and we've seen in a lot of different municipalities for subdivision development. It provides a good amount of flexibility to respond to changing market needs over time. And the minimum lot area requirement is a bit of an anachronistic provision for individual lots, because it was originally a provision that was intended to sort of establish neighborhood character, ensure serviceability, and we do that now using these other parameters much more effectively. So lot frontage is in particular is a critical component in ensuring that this servicing capacity of the site that's been accommodated is not being exceeded. So we're asking for these sites, these sort of special provisions for minimum lot frontage in recognition of that, of what we've designed through the servicing reports and all the other technical reports that have been prepared. We're asking for a bit of a standardization of front and exterior side yard setbacks. So those would both be 3.5 meters. I believe currently front yards are 3.5 meters for street front dwelling houses, but their exterior side yards are 4. So we're asking to standardize those. We're asking to standardize rear yard setbacks throughout this area. We're asking to amend some of the interior side yards, particularly by dwelling type. So we're asking to allow a reduced side yards of 0.6 meters on one side for single attached houses, as long as the other side of the lot is 1.2 meters. And this is a setback that we've used in a lot of other municipalities and a lot of other subdivision development of this type. It's a very efficient layout, and it allows sort of for the twinning of driveways for singles as well. So it allows for a little bit more efficient layout of the subdivision, and with the insurance that one of the side lot lines is at least 4 feet, it also ensures that there's enough green space on the site for things like swales and stormwater management. Next slide, please. Just a few other provisions that we're asking for. The Town of Napanee zoning bylaw has a standard site triangle requirement, which is a very high requirement. I believe it's 9 meters by 9 meters. We are asking to reduce that because we don't have any major intersections in the subdivision. All of the intersections are going to be stop sign controlled, so there aren't any really substantial ones. And a 3.5 meter by 3.5 meter site triangle has been reviewed by our traffic engineer. It's what our traffic engineer felt would be appropriate, and that's why we're asking to incorporate that into zoning. We're asking for a maximum lot coverage. We're asking to, again, standardize that throughout the R5 zone so that all of the dwelling types have the same one. It makes the building permit process that much easier and that much more straightforward. And we're also asking to standardize the landscaped open space requirement to 35%. This would actually have the effect of increasing the requirement for single detached houses, but for street front dwelling houses, it wouldn't change. Next slide, thank you. This slide is showing the proposed site-specific zoning for the 2 apartment blocks. So we're asking to reduce the minimum lot area per unit requirement. And that the area per unit requirement that we're proposing is based on the maximum density that would be permitted by the official plan designation. So the 120 units per net hectare, which works out to 40 units on one of the lots and 41 units on the other. Our expectation is that the lots will be developed with 32 unit buildings. That's what we've been sort of planning for in terms of the site configuration. But we're asking for this permission so that through the detailed site plan design of each individual site, if it can be found, if the sites can be made to achieve a little bit more efficiency, then that would be undertaken. The site plan process is sufficiently detailed and technical to ensure that all of the other components of the site plan of those designs would be, of those lots would be reviewed. So servicing capacity and all of that stuff would all be examined as part of the site plan control process as well. So there's sort of a backstop mechanism there to ensure that they're not overdeveloped, even though we're asking for that a little bit of flexibility. We're asking for a few parameters here, sort of standardizing the front rear yards as well, interior side yards, and landscaped open space. We're asking for a reduced parking ratio down from 1.5 spaces per unit to 1.25. In our original submission, we had asked to go down to 1, and then in sort of consultation with staff, town staff and the peer reviewers, as well as our traffic engineer, we bumped that up to 1.25. And that's primarily to ensure that there's room for visitor parking on the sites. We've asked in this case as well to reduce the parking stall dimensions to that 2.6 by 5.2 meter requirement that we've seen in other municipalities and at other sites where we're asking to do the same. And that would be carried forward to the accessible parking requirements as well. And we're also asking to sort of set a maximum height here of 15 meters. Provides a little bit of flexibility for pitching, or for having a pitched roof on a 3-story walk-up, effectively is what that's based on. Next slide, thank you. And then for the site-specific open space zone. So we're asking for this open space zone that would capture the stormwater management block, the parkland, and that natural open space buffer. So we're asking to allow all of those uses in this zone. And then one of the components that we're asking to apply to that vegetated buffer or adjacent to that water course is to allow a setback of 6 meters from the north bank, or from the top of the north bank, and then 15 meters from the top of the south bank. And those figures are based on consultation with the Conservation Authority. They felt they were comfortable with the 15 meters from the south. That's their standard, and they were okay reducing the setback from the north bank, sort of recognizing that there isn't any substantial ecological function here, but that 6 meter buffer would still ensure that there's a nice naturally vegetated bank adjacent to that water course. Next slide, please. So, and with that, it's our opinion that this is a proposal that's consistent with the provincial policy statement. It conforms to the official plans of both the county and the town as amended, and it's a compatible form of residential intensification on land that was previously identified as being an appropriate location for residential development. It's close to parks and open space, and it's a development that we feel is appropriate for this site. And with that, Your Worship, I would welcome any questions or comments.
Okay, thank you very much. And I guess then with council's permission, we will let those that are sitting, with your permission, unless you want to ask the questions first. We do have people who are waiting to come into the room to ask questions. They have sent correspondence. Which do you wish to do? Do you wish to let them in the room first? Or, and I see nodding of heads. Okay, so Susan, if you could let those people that have registered with questions or wish to speak to this, and then we'll take it from there if we can, with council asking questions, please and thank you.
I believe Randy Volek is on the line to speak.
Okay.
Hello,
Randy,
can you hear me?
we can.
Okay. I got a lot of questions, but it deals with mostly what's going to be going in around me. Is that okay to proceed with that?
Yeah, I would expect it would, as long as you're concise. And I probably will set a time limit at some point, Randy, but fire away with your first one and let's see how it goes.
Okay. I guess from looking at the diagram that I got, that the road coming in from Camden Road, that'll be on the north of my property. It'll be about 1 foot high at the start of Camden Road and then 2 foot at the east end of my property. Is that correct?
Can someone out there answer that question, whether it's Michael or our consultant, please?
Through your
Through you,
worship,
Madam Chair.
I believe either Yuko or Mr. Murray Jocelyn may be on the line that can address that question.
Okay, perfect. I will let one of them speak to it. Thank you, Michael. Yuko, you go ahead then, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I'll just note briefly, so that's correct to the question from the Mr. Volek, and as noted in the response that Michael Nobles provided. But I will note as well that the engineering design, the detailed engineering design for this whole development is an ongoing aspect of the plan. So in what the plans that we provided thus far are more detailed than is typical for a draft plan of subdivision approval, and that's recognizing sort of the technical challenges of this site. So while we've identified some elevations at this point in time, there's likely going to be a little bit of refinement between now and when that road actually gets built. And that road, that intersection of Camden and Street A is in the last phase of the development. So there's going to be a bit of refinement between now and then. So that the figures that were provided by Michael Nobles are accurate based on the plans that we provided thus far, but we know that there's going to be some refinement, and it's going to there may be some slight changes over time.
Okay, so basically, I take it there'll be another meeting when everything's finalized then?
Through Your Worship, there will be another meeting with a recommendation, certainly, and then certainly that's our hope. And then following that, what that will do is it'll provide what's called draft plan approval, and then the applicant will have a series of conditions that have to be satisfied in order to obtain what's called final plan of subdivision approval. And that final plan of subdivision approval, in order to obtain that, the applicant is going to have some significantly more detailed engineering drawings prepared and reviewed by town staff, by county staff, by the peer reviewers. So there's going to be quite a bit more review that happens. That process, that detailed final plan of subdivision approval process, is not one that's generally brought back to council. It's not under that level of public scrutiny. But I believe that there is opportunity to consult with town staff on and obtain some of the documents. And maybe I should leave that question in particular to Mr. Knopes.
Well, what I was wondering just is if the public, like in this case, me, have any other questions that I can bring up before council says yes or no?
Hey, Randy, if you'll just hold off a little bit and we will let Michael answer. And then if you have one more question, I'll let you go. But Michael was going to speak to that. Okay. I know you can't see who's coming into the picture because you're on the phone, but just hold on for a sec, please, Randy.
Okay.
Yes, Your Worship. The recommendations for when each phase of a new subdivision is recommended for approval by staff, it will come back to council for that final approval. So Council will have the final say as to whether or not that phase of the subdivision will be approved based on those engineering drawings at that time. When the application is under review by staff, the public is able to come in and have a look at the drawings, ask questions at any time. So that's certainly an opportunity for Mr. Volek to do so when the application's advanced to that stage.
Okay, Randy, does that help answer your question?
Kind of. So basically, I just have to keep in touch with Michael then to see what stage it's at.
Yep, if you shoot him an email every once in a while, I'm sure that he will respond to you as to what it is. We're all going to have some questions, I'm sure, as well. So it isn't something that we're just going to drop a road in beside your house and get it going from there. This subdivision, I'm sure, wants to start out on a good foot. Okay?
Okay. Now you said one more question, but I got a lot of them, so I'll just try and get to the main ones, and then hopefully either I can sit down with Michael or James and go through this stuff.
Yep, sure. Let's see what you got here.
Okay. Well, basically, the two main questions was I was told by the county that basically where the new road comes off Camden Road, that it dropped down and then gradually go up, and that there'd be a catch basin installed between my garage and Camden Road. And I see from the drawing, there is a catch basin on the north side of the new road. And I'm guessing that means the symbols here means it goes into stormwater and there's a ditch above it.
Michael, do you wish to speak to that, or Yoko, someone?
Through your worship, I believe this question may be best addressed by Mr. Jocelyn or Mr. Leclerc. What Mr. Volek's getting at is the elevation of the proposed new road, is it going to be higher in elevation or lower in elevation in comparison to the existing Camden Road to the west?
Is that's what you're asking, Randy?
Yes, because as you're aware, the other issue on Camden Road about the water, I was told that it'd be built into this development and resolve that question. Okay. And that's how they were going to do it, was have the new road lower than Camden Road so the water would come in, run down there into the catch basin instead of ponding in front of my place and then overflowing onto my property.
Your worship, just very quickly, if I could address that. Mr. Jim Claver from the County of Lennox and Addington Roads Department is heavily reviewing the drawings as well and is certainly aware of that issue. So that is certainly top of mind for the county. Okay, but I'll turn it over to Mr. Leclerc or Mr. Jocelyn if they have any additional information to add.
Okay.
I'll speak to that if I may. It's Murray Jocelyn from Jocelyn Engineering. We're the civil engineers for the project, and we are certainly aware of the drainage issues that are in the immediate area and throughout the subdivision. And yes, we are taking all the steps that we can to collect drainage and bring it into the stormwater pond, deal with it in a controlled fashion, and then release it to the storm system that discharges to the east. In some regard, we are constrained by elevations at Camden Road. The elevation of Camden Road doesn't permit us to get a catch basin right to the intersection, but we do have a catch basin as close as is technically feasible, still providing cover over the storm sewer and still collecting drainage to the stormwater pond. So that, in addition to localized drainage and grading, we will certainly deal with any drainage concerns that are in that immediate area.
Perfect. Thank you. Randy, one more and we'll see how we make out here, please. Okay,
well, that one, I'm still confused on it, so I'll have to talk to Michael or James on it later. Basically, the other one, I can't see, and on the meeting I had with James and his engineer and planner back there, I guess it was the end of February, I brought it up. I don't know if you've resolved it or not, but how are you going to control the water for me to access my other lot?
Gentlemen, who's going to speak to that?
Through your worship, I suspect that I'd like to direct that question to Mr. Jocelyn.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Jocelyn.
Well, I think all I can say is that, to repeat myself from the previous question, we are aware of the drainage concerns in the immediate area, and certainly they will be addressed in the final design before we go to construction. But Yuko made a good point earlier that we have advanced plans in support of the draft plan application that are much more advanced than you might typically see for a typical plan of subdivision. We have done this level of work to assure ourselves that these drainage concerns can be addressed, and they certainly will be in the preparation of final plans.
Thank you, Mr. Jocelyn. Okay. Randy, I'm not sure what else you've got. So perhaps what might be a suggestion is you have some pretty specific questions, and certainly you also have grave concerns. It is right next to your property. What I might suggest is if you were to address these to Michael and perhaps Mr. Jocelyn, Mr. Selkirk, whoever else needs to be involved in it, and that they could be noted down and sent back to council so that we know that you have been able to address them. Would that be something, Randy, that you think you might be agreeable to?
Yes, I'd like to sit down with one of them so they can explain some of the symbols on the drawing.
Yep, no, that's no problem. I'm going to leave it up to Michael to set up a meeting. I know that this is going to be a big change for a lot of people in the area, and I think that we need to address it head on. But I do want to give the council a chance to address some of their questions after the presentation as
Right.
well. So
well, like I say, I got a bunch of them, so I have no problems on if somebody's willing to sit down with me and go through it.
I'm sure we can find somebody that will sit down with you, physically distanced, over perhaps a coffee, and try and give you as many answers or as absolutely possible.
Okay.
Just let me finish here, please, Randy. I would just say that what I would like to do is that we do get notes on the meeting back so that we know that what has been addressed, so that we've got it for future records. Michael, can I leave that with you to look after, please?
Absolutely, Your Worship. I will touch base with Mr. Volek tomorrow and set up a time to meet and discuss.
Okay, good. Thanks, Randy, and thanks for joining us.
Okay, thanks. Can I still listen in on what other
You can listen
questions?
in. You can listen in forever if you would like.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, no,
I'll do that then.
Yeah, we're not, if Susan puts you out of the room, it's only because we need to mute you so that we're not hearing background, as well as perhaps you can certainly view it online too, but I'll let Susan make the call on that. She'll tell you what you can do.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, you're welcome, Randy. Have a good evening.
Okay, bye.
Okay, so council, questions directed to, I'll go with Councillor Pennell first, please.
Thank you, Worship. I have, it's almost like I'm playing Monopoly here. I have a bunch of little notes here. Is it okay that I just go through them all?
Yes, certainly. Yeah, I'll
Okay.
stop you when I think it's somebody else's turn.
Okay, could we have an explanation of the 4 phases? What's going to start, what's going to be the end, and what the time frame for the phases are from start to completion?
Excuse me, through you, Mayor, the phasing that's proposed currently is let's see, I'm just going to, if it's possible to bring up the plan of subdivision, I'll speak to it. I don't have a slide that identifies the phasing as it is today, but I'll describe it based on the drawings that we have. So if it's possible to bring up the draft plan, please. So I guess just while the clerk's working on that, the phasing that we've proposed at this time is 4-fold. Thank you very much, Susan. That's great. So the pattern of the roads that's shown here, I'll refer to them as Street A, which is the road that connects out to Camden Road. Street B, which is a short strip between Ginger Street and Heritage Park Drive, and then the Heritage Park Drive extension, which will effectively continue Heritage Park Drive northerly through the subdivision and then sort of connecting out to the east in front of the apartment buildings. So the phasing that's proposed is that phase 1 would consist of the the houses at the southernmost part of the site on Heritage Park Drive, the single detached houses, and then 2 blocks of the townhouses, so effectively lots 33 through 45, I believe. That's the intended first phase of development. Phase 2 would consist of the townhouses sort of to the north of that, up to Street B, on both sides of Heritage Park Drive, and then all of the townhouses on Street B. So effectively, Heritage Park Drive would be extended a little bit to the north, and then there would be a temporary turnaround. And then as part of phase 1, and then as part of phase 2, it would extend up to Street B and then link to Ginger Street. Phase 3 would complete Heritage Park Drive, so it would extend it to the north and then over across to the east, and include all of the townhouses as well as one of the apartment blocks. And then phase 4 would consist of Street A connecting out to Camden Road and all of the single detached houses along there. So the reason that phase 3 would only include one of the apartment blocks is that the intent is to rezone all of these lands, but to exclude the northernmost, so that the apartment block at the northeast most extent of the site would not be part of the draft plan of subdivision. It would be created as a separate lot in advance through council decision, and that lot could be developed before phase 3 is brought online. So it would effectively kind of be a sub phase 1 or a sub phase 2 that could be built before the whole road is extended up that way, and it would effectively have its own sort of temporary turnaround off of Ginger Street to provide access. So the zoning would allow that, and the development of that block as an apartment block would be reliant on the zoning, but it wouldn't rely on the final plan of subdivision and engineering design. All of the engineering for that block would have to be incorporated on a temporary basis or permanent basis through that site plan design, and then that would be built into the subdivision when it gets to that stage. So I think that's the phasing in a nutshell. But I'll note that phasing for a subdivision of this nature is often subject to sort of fluctuations in market demand and uptake, as well as servicing needs. So the phasing that we're proposing right now is very much based on the servicing considerations, but there's some flexibility and some opportunity for some of the boundaries between the phases to shift a little bit as market demand is identified through the market uptake of previous phases.
Okay, thank you. So when you were just finishing that up, you were saying that there's some fluctuation in timing and stuff. We don't have an idea then as to how long it will take to complete from phase 1 to phase 4?
Through you, your worship, the draft plan of subdivision will include a timeline that I anticipate to be about 3 years to complete the entire subdivision. I don't expect that 3 years will be sufficient, so we will likely need to extend that by extensions of 1 year at a time. But that process of extending draft approval is not one that any of us desire. So there's certainly an incentive from the applicant's perspective to have this built out within the 3-year timeframe, but it's an unknown how quickly the market will respond and take this all up. So it's impossible for us to commit to a timeline, but I think I can assure this council that with those sort of built-in timeframes that are required by the Planning Act, there's going to be that additional incentive to try and get this completed as quickly as it can be.
Okay, thank you. That leads me right in. That's a good segue right into the next question: is what guarantees?
Councillor Pennell, can I just interrupt you for a minute? Just because I just got a message from our clerk that Mr. Jocelyn was wishing to speak as well. And Mr. Jocelyn, was this to answer one of Councillor Pennell's questions?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Just to add a little bit to the phasing, I want to reiterate what Yuko has said, that it is very much based on market demand, but also based on an orderly sequence of phases, and also based on servicing what makes sense to extend services from one phase into the next. It'll depend very much on market demand, how long any particular phase will take to complete, but it makes sense to phase the development in such a fashion that one phase can proceed, allow it to be built out to a prescribed level of completion before going into the next phase, and not creating a disorderly pattern. And also from the applicant's perspective, it certainly makes economic sense to come up with the most cost-effective first phase to get a foot in the door, let's say, and to get the development established.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you,
May I
Mr.
continue?
Jocelyn. Yeah, you go ahead, Councillor Pennell.
So again, that just leads me into the segue of what assurances do we have that if this is going to take over the years, and one of the questions I had were already going to be answered, as in, as you do the phasing, the road will only be continued to a certain point, and then the services will only be continued to a certain point. I understand this now, but what assurances do we have that this project will actually finish? I certainly don't want to end up with a project that's been started and not finished. I don't need details, but I just need to know that there's some kind of a deposit or a refundable thing or something along the lines that assures, if there's an assurity or something along the lines that this project will go from start to finish.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Excuse me, Madam Worship.
Fine.
It's force reflex.
That's okay, I'm used to it.
That's a question that I think is probably best responded to by Mr. Nobes. I can certainly speak to the applicant's intention and that there will be securities provided throughout the phasing of this development, but maybe Mr. Nobes can speak to what mechanisms the town has to ensure that backstop is there.
Your Worship, for each phase of the development that will be recommended for approval, there will be the collection of securities in the amount that it's going to actually cost to install such works, such as the road, water, sewer system, etc. So those funds are taken up front prior to the approval being granted for each phase. So if there is a default and final approval is granted, the town does have that mechanism to go in and complete those works and not have to spend town dollars per se, because we will have that security in place to actually finish those works for each phase.
That's exactly the answer I was looking for. Thank you very much. Just a couple more, I promise. I assume that the ponds are going to have a high enough fence around so that nobody will fall in to the wetlands.
Through your worship, the ponds are not proposed to have a fence at this level, at this point in time. And the reason for that is kind of twofold. A fence has that draw. It kind of has that it's almost like a dare to people to jump over it. And most subdivision developments such as this, where there's that relationship of a park near a pond, fences are not provided. And the pond, it functions as more of a visual amenity to the community. The water is also not going to be very deep. So I think the standing water level on the pond, and maybe Mr. Jocelyn can correct me if I get this wrong, but I believe it's about, I had this number written down. It's about 4 feet deep at sort of the deepest point. And I think that's fairly typical for stormwater management ponds as part of their design.
That's something we're going to have to address, I think, and we'll talk to emergency services regarding that. I'm not totally convinced that a pond of 4 feet deep is it should be guarded. But we can talk about that later. Just two more. One, does emergency services have any issues with the proposed setbacks of the side setbacks? I understand that you're saying that one building will have in between the two buildings will have a smaller setback, as long as the other side of the building will have a larger setback. And I just wanted to make sure that emergency services at this time, because you're in the early stages of design, if they have any issues with this.
Through your worship, if I may just very briefly just provide some clarification to that point. The proposed zoning is not to have a 2-foot yard where there's a 4-foot yard. It's actually to twin 2-foot yards together. And the reason that that's proposed, the intention there being that that the walls that are facing that reduced yard setback are not going to have any windows. So the building code would require that there either be no windows or that any windows be provided with fire shutters. So it's to provide that flexibility effectively so that the garage can be located on that side and that they can be twinned along with the driveways. So I think that's just the clarification that I wanted to provide, your worship, and maybe Mr. Noakes would like to respond with respect to the emergency services.
Michael?
Through your worship, emergency services has been circulated on the applications and has not provided any comments to date with regard to that specifically. However, they will be certainly consulted specifically on that matter. They have been, there were discussions surrounding the water flow requirements and what is proposed to be provided through the servicing report, and there were no concerns with regards to that. So there's going to be adequate water flow to fight any fires in the area. With regard to the setbacks, the building code does provide those construction requirements, and those will have to be met. But we will also consult with emergency services just regarding that setback as well.
Fantastic, thank you. And the last one is that this property has been vacant for many years, as we know, and some existing homeowners on Ginger Street have taken advantage of a little extra space, let's say, and I just want to know how that's going to be handled.
Through you, worship, there is a process associated with plan of subdivision called a first application to land titles, where the boundaries of the land are confirmed with all of the neighbors, and the applicant is in the midst of that process right now. So the all properties that abut onto the subject lands would have been provided with the property boundary identified by the surveyor, and the applicant will work with the individual homeowners on a case-by-case basis to verify the property boundaries where there has been some encroachment.
That's great. And that's all I have. Thank you very much for putting up with me. I appreciate it.
Deputy Mayor Kaiser.
Thank you, Your Worship. Really just two statements. One, in response to Councillor Pinnell's question about phasing, I'm wondering if we could get a copy of a phasing diagram that we could add to the minutes for future reference that we could go back to if we wanted to at any time, if that's possible. But my other comment was just to say that I'm very happy with this proposal. Access to a housing has been noted for some time as a priority in this community. This is a notable development. The thing about this development too is that it falls well within the urban town, and we need to continue targeting development within the urban boundaries of the town. Obviously, we had one recently that was on active farmland, and so I'd like to see this where we're using areas within the town that aren't otherwise producing food. And I also wanted to express my pleasure with Mr. Selkirk's swift movement from purchase to development. I'm very pleased with that. We were hopeful for that at the time of the making of the deal, and this is coming to fruition, and I'm very pleased to see that. So I don't know if Michael popped up, maybe he wants to talk about a phasing diagram. Thank you.
Through your worship, I do have a phasing diagram that I can share. If I can share my screen, I can just show council that, or this can be sent to Susan to include in the minutes. It's actually in the agenda. It's under what is it called? It is called Civil Drawing Binder, and it is on page 2 of the Civil Drawing Binder. So it is there. It's already in the agenda there.
Good enough. We just didn't see it as part of the presentation, but knowing it's there, I skipped over it earlier. There's a lot of reports there, but thank you. That's good to know where it is. Thank you.
Anything further of council? I guess, oh, sorry, Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Mayor. This is probably the cart before the horse. This is an exciting project to see come forward. And a couple questions I just had with regards to the apartment buildings. Are the heights of the buildings proposed, how are the heights relative to the existing building that's already there? That would be the first one.
Through you, your worship, I'm just confirming that figure now.
Okay.
It's the same as the maximum height that's permitted on that site.
Okay, that's excellent. Thank you. And since you had taken what was, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought I understood you had taken what was initially planned to be smaller, 2 smaller green spaces and make 1 larger green space. Is there any way that tree planting in the street front dwelling houses can be included in your subdivision plan to make up for having lost a green space? And that's just something for consideration. I wasn't expecting an answer on that tonight.
Your worship, I can address the tree planting statement there. Within all new plans of subdivision, tree planting is a requirement in order to obtain a building permit, and a deposit is associated with that. So the town takes a deposit when there's an application made for a building permit, and a part of that deposit is to ensure that a tree is planted on the property. However, I believe in this instance, the proposal is to install, actually plant trees in the municipal right-of-way rather than on private property. So in this case, it'll function slightly differently. However, the trees that are proposed at this moment would be town-owned trees. So that is something that council may want to consider when approving final plans of subdivision for each subsequent phase. So the town would be responsible to maintain those trees rather than if the trees were placed on private property. However, the developer has requested that the trees do be placed on town property.
Okay, Councillor Johnson.
Considering the smaller lot sizes, I wouldn't say that that was a bad idea. And I'm happy to know that it is in the long-term plans. Thank you, everybody, for your time in bringing this forward.
Okay, anything further from council? I thought I have a couple of statements, kind of questions. If we weren't in this virtual COVID land, would we have had a public meeting on this subdivision and all the adjustments? And I don't mean all the adjustments, but the different zoning requirements and so on that we're looking at tonight. Would this normally have been done just in a normal council meeting as a public meeting, or would there have been a separate public meeting? Michael?
Through your worship, this would have normally been handled through a normal council meeting, such as this. However, the developer would always have the opportunity to hold a voluntary open house as well.
Okay, good. And with the apartment houses going at one end and the parkland going at the other, and I'm glad to see some parkland down there, and I hope that we get a chance to have a larger input in some sort of design, because we're going to be the ones that'll be putting things in there, and our residents will be using it. But to aid us in this, where we haven't had that chance in others, is there any chance for any sort of green space or parkland, and maybe I'm just not seeing it, at the north end where the apartments are, because I would love to see them have a chance to have some vegetation, some shaded spots, even a spot to sit. Am I just not seeing that, Mr. Leclerc, on the, or Michael, on the plans?
Thank you for the question, Your Worship. The plans don't provide that level of detail for the individual apartment blocks, but one thing we're not asking to amend in the zoning bylaw is the minimum amenity area requirement for those two apartment uses. So there will be, those lots will be required to provide the minimum required of amenity, whether it take the form of outdoor space or a combination of outdoor and indoor space.
Yep. Perfect. And something that I always ask, because it's one of my interests, is, and I'm going to say this very clearly, I would hope that in the apartment buildings, because there is funding available, that we would look at some affordable housing. And by affordable housing, for those in the room and outside the room, by that I do not mean geared to income housing. I mean housing where there is a little bit of wiggle room for people, retired people and so on, that their pensions and their investments haven't gone it. There's such an opportunity through CMHC and so on, that I would hope through the county, with my warden's hat on, that maybe there would be a chance to look at that, or at least send you to someone who could give you the information, Mr. Selkirk. And also accessibility. We have such an aging population that it would be wonderful to see some accessible units, not just perhaps in the apartment buildings, but in the single and the townhouses too. And that's just a suggestion, because it's a very strong interest of mine. And if there is nothing further, I do want to thank all you gentlemen and the people that have come into the call. This has been a long part of the meeting, but extremely informative, and has been much more successful than I thought it might be with a virtual meeting. We seem to be kind of getting used to it. So I thank you. And if there's nothing further of council or those that are in the room with us, I would ask for a motion to adjourn the public meetings under the Planning Act. Moved by Councillor Richardson, seconded by Councillor Pennell. All in favor of that motion? Motion is carried. Thank you very much, everyone. We'll move on now. Everybody good to keep going? Okay. Items for discussion. We have the council minutes of June 23rd. I need a motion to accept the minutes of the special council meeting of December, yeah, it seems like it, of June 23rd be adopted as presented. Moved by Councillor McCormack, seconded by Councillor Richardson. All in favor of that motion? Motion is carried. Also, the same recommendation for the council minutes of July the 7th, please. Moved by Deputy Mayor Kaiser, seconded by Councillor Johnson. All in favor of that motion? Motion is carried. Thank you very much. 5.3, we have some correspondence from Don Eddington regarding the County Road 8 quarry. He has sent it in for June 8th and the 19th, two different sets. Mr. Eddington and I spoke today. They still have more information coming that they would like to be able to refer this to our August meeting. And perhaps by that time too, and it's worked fairly well tonight, they have a group of about 20 that want to come into the room. I don't know how we can allow them all to speak, but we need to be able to work out a way that they can do it. So I would want to bring to your attention and the attention of those in the public that there is a lot of information within the agenda this evening. These people are quite concerned and want to be able to bring forth their information to council to see. You will see that there is a recommendation for us to receive, but all I want to do is just refer it to our August meeting and let them come forward and speak to us as a council then, which when we spoke today, Mr. Eddington had spoken to the rest of his group and they were happy about that. I believe these people need a chance to bring their concerns forward. So with that, I will look for a motion to refer it to our August meeting. Councillor McCormack, Councillor Norrie, any further comments or questions? All in favor of the motion? Motion is carried. I am going to mention in this too, and I don't think it needs to be part of the motion. I'm going to just back up here a little. They were kind of concerned that if there was any kind of an application for zoning or variances or anything that council hold off until we receive all their information when they come forward in August. And I think I can be pretty well assured at this point we have received no applications, but I would honor their wish that they would be allowed to bring forward their concerns. If council is agreeable to that, whether we would have a second motion, perhaps to just back it up so they feel confident that we won't try to just ignore what they want us to talk about and listen to. So perhaps I'll have that by way of motion too, so they're reassured that, okay, Councillor McCormack, Councillor Richardson, thank you very much. All in favor of that motion? Motion is carried. BIA update. Councillor Norrie, did you wish to speak to this now, or did you wish me to just get the recommended motion to receive these tonight?
Well, while I have the floor, I must just
Sure.
listen to other questions, if that's okay.
So it's fine, thank you.
We've all seen the letter from Mr. Lucas, a well-written letter, and a lot of us had discussions with him. I'm not going to read the whole thing. It's just in summary. 2 items he brought up was an AGM, which we on the board agree, and the possibility of, because they paid full dues and nothing happening for a few months, some sort of rebate or something. So there's 2 items. One, in regards to them both, just so you know, we've hired, or the board themselves hired a part-time staffer as of today. She'll be introduced tomorrow to the BIA in their Zoom meeting. Then I hope to have her come to the next council meeting to introduce her. Michelle Dory Forrestel, a retired teacher who went back to Queens, took courses, and now been hired for 24 hours a week to get the BIA back on track. So that'll be good. And tonight we have 8 applicants for 4 positions, so which will be discussed later. So things are happening with the BIA. As far as any type of rebate, I spoke to Mr. Dalbor. That's being looked into, depending what the new board and new staff want. So that's basically in a nutshell. But the letter's well written. I hope you've read it, and that's all I really have to say right now about the BIA at this time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Norrie. Susan, you have appeared on there. Am I doing something wrong?
We just have agenda item number 5.4, but we can continue with BIA if you want and then go back.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you so much. You do have a recommendation there that we have resignations. Tiffany Lloyd, who had been their executive director, Penny Smart and Joseph Erm, I'm not sure whether I'm saying that properly, have resigned from the board just to do for several reasons. And I would suggest that along with the recommendation to receive their resignations, that we also have a letter go out to them, thanking them for their efforts and service on behalf of town council. It's been a tough go for lots of the downtown merchants, and I know they've tried to keep things afloat down there. So I would receive that first, if I would take a motion to send them a letter of thanks. First take their resignation, secondly send them out a letter. Moved by Councillor Johnson, seconded by Deputy Mayor Kaiser. All in favor of that portion of the motion? Motion is carried unanimously. And then receive for information the correspondence from Sean Lucas dated June the 20th regarding the Napanee BIA and the BIA update from Councillor Norrie, and further that council provide direction regarding the BIA, which we just did, in statements of interest, which we will deal with in closed session as announced. All in favor of that, or no, sorry, I need a motion to that effect. Councillor Norrie. Councillor Richardson, all in favor of that motion? Motion is carried. Now I'll back up to 5.4. We have correspondence from the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, Steve Clark, regarding COVID-19 Economic Recovery Act, July 8th, 2020. We have a recommendation that council receive for information the correspondence from Mr. Clark dated July the 8th, advising of the province tabling the COVID-19 Economic Recovery Act legislation. Moved by Deputy Mayor Kaiser, seconded by Councillor McCormack. Comments or questions? All in favor of that motion? Motion is carried. CAO service area updates. Mr. Calery.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, members of council. There's a few things that I would like to point out to council in the report. And I'll work a little bit backwards to the front. On page 477 of the report, there's a reference to the internal and external communications, which most of our communications recently have been with regard to the pandemic and the municipal control group. Normally, council would have received an update today from our regular control group meeting. However, that control group meetings have been moved to Thursdays from Tuesdays. So there is no update, and that's why you didn't receive something this evening prior to council. On page 477, I would also just point out under the Trans-Canada, the Community Development Committee Fund Trans-Canada, that is, council's aware, is in the process of transferring from Trans-Canada's responsibility to Assura, the new owners of the plant. And we're trying to schedule a meeting, and it looks like there'll be a meeting in early August with the newest member of the committee, which will be Mr. Wick from the plant. The plant manager will be joining that committee, and we'll have more information once that committee meets with regard to the direction that the new owners of the plant want to go, and discuss how those grants will transpire moving forward. I'm also on page 475. Very pleased now that since with the emergency ongoing, we only had one accommodation plan for staff that was remaining, and that will be soon dealt with, and therefore we have all our staff back to work on normal operations and normal hours of work, which is wonderful. The one other thing I would like to point out, if I could refer to page 474 of the report. The second box down on that page deals with surplus land, and there was an update provided by the General Manager of Community and Corporate Services with regard to the expressions of interest. This is part of a process that's been moving forward since the report that he provided to council back in December of 2019, which was to do a test with regard to the sale of properties from Rogers and Trainer. I called that because on page 455 at the beginning of the report, there is a staff recommendation. And I would like to propose an amendment to the staff recommendation at this point in time. The staff recommendation currently is for council to receive the report. I would propose an amendment, and the staff would like council to consider a further recommendation that, based on the staff report, as I just mentioned, from December of 2019 council meeting, that an immediate moratorium on all municipally owned land sales take effect, with the exception of the last Roger at 37 Dundas Street West, and item 5.15 that's on the agenda, which is pages 609 to 622, which is a declaration of surplus of a small piece of land to clean up. That's part of lots 1 and 2, part of Mill Reserve. Plan 82 and parts 2 and 3 of Plan 29R10661. Until the report, and by the report I mean the property sales report, can come back as scheduled in the fall of 2020, and that further that the report will include recommendations on future land sale policy. So I would propose that's an additional staff recommendation that is requested for council to consider. I would be happy if there's any questions, or any of the general managers to answer questions on their portion of the report.
Council? Yeah, Councillor Pennell. No, you're muted, Councillor Pennell.
I'm muted. Thank you. I just have a couple of questions here, and hopefully we can do the same from before, just carry on through. Page 464, Harrington Lane. I just want to give a background on this, is that I received a call from a resident that wanted some child at play signs installed with Harrington Lane as a no throughway, no exits. However, there is residents from the area that have been using it as a shortcut. Goes down an unassumed road and over a bridge. So that's where that's all coming from. So I'm glad to see that there's going to be a traffic study there. And that's unfortunately with the monies to fix that bridge on a unmaintained road. I have to go back. Sorry, I said unassumed, but I meant unmaintained road. That would be ridiculous to spend that kind of money. So I just wanted to give a quick background on that, how that came about. There was actually a transport that I guess their GPS took them over a bridge that is failing. On 465 under Winchester Park, I just want to know on the 61 Splinter Drive, is the fence going to be removed? And if so, at whose expense? And then also at 96 Beverly, it says that the town will repair the ditch. I'm just wondering if that repair bill for the fence coming down and the ditching, will that be charged back to the homeowner as they've obviously done things that they shouldn't have. And then there will just be one more after that. So I'd like an answer if we could answer that, and then I'll carry on to the last one.
Through your worship, staff are currently speaking with the affected homeowners, and the work that has been done there was done without our approval. So the intent is to work out an agreement with the current homeowners that they remove that stuff at their own expense and their own time in a timely fashion. So we'll work with them and be reasonable, but we have expectations that we'd like them to meet.
Okay. Thank you. But then the repair to the ditching, we're going to take care of that cost then?
That repair, so there's further investigation that's required on that one, but if it's something that the homeowner had done, the expectation will be the homeowner will be responsible for any repairs there.
Fantastic, thank you. And my last one is on page 471. The status of Salmon River access in Roblin will have an impact on future planning of the North 401 tourism. What's going on with Salmon River access? I had no idea, so someone could maybe let me know. I'd appreciate it.
Is there anyone that can answer that now, or can we take it as something as an action that needs to be looked after?
I would most likely, I'd be okay with just somebody at some time, just let me know. I don't need it right now.
Okay. Anything further from council? Mr. Cowdery, if you could just come back on for a minute. I just want to make sure that I am clear in your adjustment of the recommendation that is on my page 474 with requests for expressions. And then if we were to put a moratorium on any sales of property, how it would affect property, something that's further on in our agenda, please, if you could just review that for me.
Sure. The intention on the moratorium would simply be the fact that council had approved a current process back in December of 2019 that's underway with regard to, although it was delayed for both pandemic and some property ownership issues, with the current property at 37 Dundas Street West. So that's already underway. The other property that there is a property on the agenda under item 5.15.
Yes, okay.
And that is required as part of the planning process, and we as staff did not want to interfere with that particular application as it's moving forward. And so other than that, the intention was to try and put a moratorium on any further land offers or land sales, that they not be considered until a full report is returned to council expected in the early part of fall of 2020, that would also provide recommendations towards any future land sale policies.
The because 5.15, of course, is being dealt with after this. I just want to make sure that everyone understands that if we go with a moratorium, if that is what council wishes to do, moratorium on sale properties to be sold, that this declaration in 5.15, the declaration of surplus property, could in fact hold up a fairly substantial development. Am I saying that in the right way and everybody understanding it? Yes, yes, okay. And that is of concern to me. Councillor Johnson?
Thank you, Mayor. I thought I understood that 5.15 would be excluded from the moratorium.
That's right. I just want to make sure everybody understands that. I
Okay.
just wanted it said out loud. Thank you very much. I just needed someone to say it. And while we are, is there anything further from council? Well, I'm going to speak to this while we're on the sales of surplus property. I believe that it's time that we respond to those people who have called us in the past week or so regarding statements made on Mr. Hogel's Facebook page. As a council, we're always ready to respond to residents regarding concerns and questions. It is our job. We are not obligated. What we are not obligated to do is to respond to accusations, innuendos, accurate or not, from a Facebook page. That is not the way any government should operate. So this statement is directed to all residents, but in particular, those who have reached out to us. There are several reasons that we can go into closed session, more than several, one of them being the acquisition or disposition of property. Mr. Hogel's statements on his Facebook page reflect his idea and beliefs, and I guess of facts. As Mr. Hogel, who was our town solicitor years ago, he knows that anything done within closed session cannot be released by council until there is a time when it can be put out into the public. And this is done often. And some of it, particularly when it involves identifiable individuals or legal matters that require confidentiality, it can never be released. For all those that called us, you got the same answer, which Mr. Hogel will say that we are plotting or trying to deceive the public. Such is not the case. Tonight, we as a council are asking for a complete independent review of surplus property taxes, not just in recent years, but maybe going back for 8 to 10 years. The results of many of these have been released, but we will ask for a review. The review should include property information, a total review of instructions to and from council, advertising methods, open market or tender process, assessments, appraisals, asking price, minimum price, whether to accept high, low, or any bids, bid opening process, all should be included in the report. Also in the report should be a checklist for process in total, including closing of the transaction, release of information when the transaction is fully completed. Also, I would be happy to take any other suggestions from council that they'd like to add, but it needs to be put into a concise resolution to be done by an independent party with access to all or any information and to be completed by our second meeting in September. We need to source a consultant and we need to have an up dollar figure in place. This process was already being looked at for a review by staff on a long list of bylaws and processes that should be updated and reconfigured to meet the needs of council, residents, and staff. This is being done as all of us, and I can only speak for council, with their permission, but I'm sure that staff feel the same way, so that perhaps we can end the speculation and the accusations of being racist, of trying to favor one bid over another, to show the public that we've heard their questions and want them to be answered in a clear and concise method. Also, if Mr. Hogel has accusations, he should be making them by deputation or even correspondence, not by social media, in my opinion. Council's response should always be to everyone, not just those that follow his page. Mr. Hogel has made many deputations over the year and has seen changes made due to those deputations. We have confidence that staff has fairly and justly served the public and the corporation over these processes. We believe that the study and the report will show same. If there are suggestions for adjustments and methods that council see as beneficial and transparent, I'm sure that we will be happy to adopt them. Thank you. With that, I would entertain a motion to include, which I will give to Susan to make sure that she has it as to how we proceed. Council's wishes. Councillor Pennell and then Deputy Mayor Kaiser.
Sorry, I was just making the motion that we would.
Oh, okay. So.
And I was seconding it.
You were seconding it. So I'll give the verbiage out just to make sure, because I realized that I did include a lot of things. Tonight, so as a council, we're asking for a complete independent review of surplus property sales, not just in recent years, but for the past 8 to 10 years. The result, within that, the review should include property information and a total review of instructions to and from council, advertising methods, open market or tender process, assessment, appraisal, asking price, minimum price, whether to accept high, low, or any bid, and the bid opening process. Included in the report should be a checklist for the process in total, including the closing of the transaction, release of information when the transaction is fully completed. Is there anything that you, we also should, we need it within that to source a consultant, an outside consultant, and that we get the report get the report by the second week in September. And I'm not even sure what to put as an up figure in place for it. Any suggestions? Or I've got to think that we're somewhere between 3,000 and 5,000, and to me it's worth it to get this going. But I need council to come in on this. This has got to be all of us, not just one of us. Councillor McCormack, you have a suggestion for a dollar figure?
Well, Your Worship, I'm not going to suggest an amount right now, but I think 3,000 would be on the very low end. I don't know, going back so many years, what we're going to get for 3,000. I would like to suggest that we go out and request those that are able to do this kind of investigation to propose to us what they can do in a quick timeline, because this second meeting in September doesn't really give a lot of time. I would like to suggest possibly that we leave that a little open to get a proper investigation. We don't want to have somebody being rushed. And I'm open to hearing from proponents what they're going to recommend for a cost and a timeline.
Okay, so the direction would be for staff to, we still need to give sort of a, some sort of guidance. If they want to get this going, it's gonna have to get going within the next 2 to 3 weeks. So it would be either by calling a special meeting to discuss this. I see Mr. Cowrie has popped up. So is there some guidance there, Mr. Cowrie?
I would just suggest to council that if council provides direction that they want a third-party review within a reasonable budget, I think that staff will be able to source a vendor quickly and provide what we probably want back is a proposal of a review in phases, so that council could understand. We could get some work started, but we would propose phases so that council would understand doing this much work would be this much money, additional work would be this much, and that possibly we could get an interim report back before council your August meeting, knowing that you'll have likely the 2 meetings in September then to have a good indication whether you need an extension, or we'll have timelines that are available to that. It's very possible you may see an initial report and then want to see additional information on top of that, or extend the review beyond a first phase, if that makes any sense.
Council's comments on that, I guess, amendment that we would have to make.
Yeah, through your worship, I'm okay with a phased approach. I think council has a very clear understanding from us that it's desired that this happen in a very expedient manner, but without breaking the bank in the process. And so a phased approach, I think, is a good approach to accomplish that, because you get what you pay for, but you don't have to pay for all of it if you don't want all of it. Again, without setting a dollar limit, I mean, I agree with what Councilor McCormack said, that 3,000 is probably on the bottom end. I was anticipating 10 to 15. So, and I'm not setting a limit. I'm just suggesting that from my perspective, 3,000 to 5,000 surprised me that we were aiming that low because of the time backwards. I realize it's captured minutes, but at the same time, you're looking at a review of 10 years of minutes. That's a fair lengthy review. So it might be higher than that.
So I guess a friendly amendment would be to source, which we'd want to make sure it was within the procurement bylaw that we do it, but also that it is a staged approach. If we can put that within it, that we would get an initial. We just have one meeting in August, am I right, Susan? Do we have one or two meetings in August?
Just one.
Just one, so that we would have a staged approach, that we would have a report. Does that seem like it's good with council? I just want to make sure that we have a clear line to go through that can't or should not be questioned, because we're doing what, if it was asked outright, would have been done ages ago. Council's with Councilor McCormack.
Your worship, I would like staff to come back to council with to identify those people that are bidding, if you want, on this process, and to see what the background and experience is, and if they've had relationships with the towns before. In many instances, that might not be what we're looking for. So I think I'd like to see staff come back to council with who they were able to get to bid on this process.
Okay, so point taken. Deputy Mayor Kaiser.
I think one of the parameters might also be a timeliness of completion, so that once we give the go-ahead in August to choose A, B, or C, that we know that they have an estimated timeline at that point, and maybe that's a factor in deciding who does it. And the other thing I wanted to suggest was, between now and August, I expect that with this direction, our staff can begin some background gathering of data or aligning of things to assist, so that we can do some of it in-house, at least in providing the data to the consultant of choice.
Okay, so we have within the motion right now, we have the information that we want. What we need to, with council's permission, because I don't want to be accused of leading you down the garden path again. If I like Councillor McCormack's idea of it coming back to council, and it doesn't have to wait till August. We can call a special meeting for this, and now that there's Zoom, nobody's planning. It would be an open session advertised to the public, that we would then look at the proposed applicants that would be doing it. I think that that's an excellent suggestion. So we could do that and also have a budget for it. So would that be something that the mover and seconder would be good to adjust amend their motion to read that way? Yes, for Councilor Canal. Yes, for Deputy Mayor Kaiser. Yep. So, Councilor Johnson, you had your hand up.
Thank you, Mayor. I was just going to say that I would fully support having an extra meeting to get this process going a little bit faster. And then we would probably already have some initial answers by the August meeting.
Yeah, that's right. And I think then too, we need, if we're going to call a meeting for something like this, I want to be able to put it out in the public, and Susan would certainly know what our parameters are on that. And it could be the only thing on the agenda, if that's it, to discuss. And then it's nothing but transparent. Deputy Mayor Kaiser.
I think you covered it in your wording earlier, when you referred to the checklist, but I would like to see coming out of this process a very clear, defined process or policy which pre-delineates how closed meeting discussions around disposition, acquisition of lands would automatically or nearly automatically be released to open with council's final scrutiny, perhaps. So out of this process, a policy on that.
I don't know whether I included that or not, but also a checklist for a process in total, including closing of the transaction and release of the information when the transaction is fully completed. So I think we've got that. And Susan, again,
Thank you.
I have the verbiage here. I will make sure that you have it because I know we've kind of danced around. Anything further from council? Councillor Pennell.
I wasn't going to say it, but I'm going to say it. So all of this process that we're just going through is to provide transparency.
Yes.
So I'm sure that we're going to hear tomorrow that we whitewashed this issue, that we stepped around it, we overstepped it, stepped around, danced around, or whatever. And I have to say that I'm happy that you're a more seasoned politician than I am, because the statement that you made was read very nice. I'm not quite sure if I could have done the same. I'm very passionate about this this whole issue that has arose, and I just want to make sure that everybody knows that we're not sidestepping something. We're providing a report that is it's going to be very transparent. Before I end up saying something that I shouldn't, I'll just leave it with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pennell. Anything further from council? If not, Susan, you have the information. I have a mover and a seconder and a friendly amendment, and I will make sure that I send you the verbiage because I have it here, and that it matches exactly what you have written down and what is in my notes. Any further comments or questions? If not, all in favor of the motion? Unanimously approved. Thank you so much. Thank you, council. Now, have we received for information the CAO's service area updates? No. So I guess we need to do that. Motion by Deputy Mayor Kaiser, seconded by Councillor McCormack. Any further comments or questions on that? Mr. Cowrie, you've popped up. Did you have something you wanted to add before we were finished here?
No, I just a point of clarification for staff purposes, whether or not your receiving of the report also included the moratorium on sales.
That's what I moved.
Pardon?
That's what I moved.
So
I moved with Ray's suggested amendment. So yes, with the moratorium on land sales, accepting the ones as listed.
okay, which would include, just for the public and for us to know, which would include, we would still be, as had been arranged in December, January, we would be moving ahead. I just want to make sure I'm right here with the 37 Dundas. And also so that we have within the discussion coming up with 5.15 with the declaration of surplus property with the intent to convey so that we would not be holding up a very large development, which yes. I believe it is, we have the opinion of value and everything else to go with it. So we'll deal with that when it comes up in the agenda. We have a mover and a seconder. Deputy Mayor Kaiser. Do I have a seconder?
Yeah, somebody did.
Okay. Councillor McCormack. All in favor of that motion? Motion is carried unanimously. Thank you so much, council. On to financial infrastructure. Ice resurfacing machine tender. It's not a Zamboni. You have before you, who's it must be Charlie, because he just popped up. Charlie, did you wish to speak to this before we went any further?
Just very briefly, and good evening, Mayor and members of council. So just a very quick recap on, and I've mentioned this in my report, on March the 19th at the special session of council, The capital approved budget report actually included the purchase of an ice resurfacing machine. So then with that approval, staff moved forward with a request for tenders process. At the conclusion, one submission was received. The bid met the criteria, the specifications, and it was also under budget. So I think it's important to emphasize that we're also mindful that ice resurfacing machines are very specialized equipment. And as such, there's a limited number of suppliers. Any questions council may have, I'd be pleased to answer.
Any questions to Charlie regarding this? We fund this through a reserve, am I right, Charlie? That we fund this through some sort of a reserve as well, that we keep putting it away? And what's the cycle for replacing those? What's the time between the two? I know we have 2 ice resurfacers. So what's the timeline between the 2 of them for replacing them?
I see our treasurer has popped up there.
Okay, all right.
Hi, Mayor and Council. I'll just speak to the, as far as the financing goes, and I'll let Charlie speak to the turnaround time. There is an extra fee on ice rentals that are collected at the SBC, which pays for it. That money goes directly into a reserve. So these funds do not affect the ratepayer at all. It is a user pay collection for reserve, and therefore does not touch the taxpayer at all. As far as the turnaround time, I'll leave that to Charlie.
Yep. Thanks very much, Paul. Okay, Charlie. Yeah.
Thank you, Mayor. As I mentioned in the report, actually, it's from the time that the order is confirmed, it's 1 month. Excuse me, it's 1 year to build the machine. So.
No, I guess maybe that wasn't really quite my question. I may not have phrased it properly. We have 2 of them. What's the age difference between them? Because we never want to be caught when we had to replace 2, I assume.
Again, through yourself, Mayor, the one that we've traded in is a 2011.
Okay. Yeah, so get some good life out of it. Okay, you have a recommendation before you, Council, that we receive for information, and further that we accept the request for tenders for the parks and facilities process undertaken by municipal staff as having met the goals and principles of the municipal procurement policies forming part of the Town of Greater Napanee Bylaw 05-05 as amended. And further that the council award the RFT 2020-01 to Suffice Corporation for the supply and delivery of 1 new 2020 Olympia model Millennium H ice resurfacing machine in accordance with their submission, and further the council authorized the mayor and the clerk, who usually sign things, to execute the agreement on behalf of the town. And don't call it a Zamboni, because it's not one. Council's wishes.
So moved.
Yeah, we gotta have Councillor Richardson in on this one. Moved by Councillor Norrie, seconded by Councillor Richardson. All in favor of the motion? Motion is carried unanimously. Thank you, Charlie, and thank you, Paul. And Charlie, you're still on deck there. We have before us the ExploreNet Communications Agreement, ground site 651 Township Road 1. Charlie, you can go ahead and speak to this. I see Brant's in on it too, please.
Yep. Thank you, Mayor. I'm sure council's familiar with this. We looked at leasing a small portion of our South Fredericksburgh landfill site for the purpose of the construction of a telecommunication tower. We had some negotiations with ExploreNet, and what's submitted this evening to council is a copy of the agreement. And again, I'd be pleased to answer any questions.
Any questions, Charlie, by council? If not, you have a recommendation. Have they given you, Charlie, a timeline on when they're going to start this?
Yes, they want to get going ASAP, and I believe under the agreement, August 1st is when that'll be the commencement date of the contract.
That's ASAP, so that's good. So you have before you a recommendation that council receive for information the financial services and community and corporate services, ExploreNet Communications ground site agreement, and further that the revenue generated during the initial 10-year term of the agreement shall be allocated to an IT and communications reserve account. And further, that if ExploreNet Inc. as the licensee extends the agreement by the 2 renewal terms pursuant to the ground site agreement, the revenue generated shall also be allocated to the IT and communications reserve account. And further, that the council authorize the mayor and the clerk to execute the said ExploreNet Communications Inc. ground site agreement on behalf of the town. Council's wishes. Moved by Deputy Mayor Kaiser, seconded by Councillor Johnson. Any further comments or questions? If not, thank you, Charlie. I know when I'm going to announce this and be very outright, the mayor got more involved in this perhaps than she should have, because there were questions that they were trying to get passed by the MOE. And for that, Mr. McDonald, I must say, I apologize if I caused you any grief, but I intend to be very forthright. You're probably not going to change me in this term, but I do apologize. Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Did we vote on that, Susan? No. Do I have a motion? Okay. Councilor.
You have a mover and seconder.
I have a mover and seconder. All in favor of the motion? Motion is carried. Thank you so much. All right, now we're on to 5.9, 2020 grant allocation. Paul, did you wish to speak to this, to answer any questions that council might have, please?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is a housekeeping item. In previous years, the $19,000 that's generally a part of the budget process is identified as to how much is going to particular groups, how much is kept aside for the allocation for people representing the town in sporting events, and how much is distributed through the community fund. The wording of this is exactly the same as the 2019 budget presentation. During my budget presentation this year, this was something that I had missed. We did have a request invoice from the Loyalist Parkway, but unfortunately I'm not able to send that those funds out until I have a council resolution for that. So again, this is a housekeeping item. It's the same wording as 2019. It's no more funds than was allocated in 2019, and it's no more than was allocated as part of the deliberations in 2020.
Any questions, Paul, from council on this? It is the same thing that we put into place a while ago, so therefore you do have a recommendation before you that council receive for information the Financial Services 2020 Grant Allocation Report, and further the council authorize the allocation of the town of Greater Napanee grant allocation as follows. Community Foundation of Lennox and Addington, $12,500. Loyalist Parkway Association, $1,500. Deserado Transit, $1,000. And other grant applications, allocations would be $4,000. And further, the council directed all other grant requests received to date, except for the request for the Napanee Cemetery Board, be forwarded to the Community Foundation of Lennox and Addington for consideration. Moved by Councillor McCormack, seconded by Councillor Pinal. All in favor of that motion? Motion is carried. Thank you so much. You might as well stay on the screen, Paul, because you're up for the financial services in 5.1. I'll let you continue, and then see if we've got any questions, and then we will try to get a resolution.
Okay, thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm just going to be switching back and forth from the report and Zoom. What this is, it's an application. It's the it's a report to seek a resolution from council to go ahead and apply for the FCM grant for asset management. This is a continuation of a grant that had been given previously and had stopped, and now the FCM is given this grant again. I'll give a quick little bit of a background. There are certain legislative requirements of all municipalities spanning from 2019 up to 2024 that's pushing municipalities into readiness as far as asset management, meaning looking at the lifespan of all of our assets and making sure that we are funding all of those asset replacement schedules. 2019 saw the completion of the asset management policy, which the former treasurer completed and passed in June of 2019. There's a number of other requirements that are coming up. We are set for 2020. However, we have some work to do in our service levels and also our condition analysis. And I'll do a presentation to council later on to explain it a little bit more. And I don't mean to seem like putting the cart before the horse, but I am making sure that we are on track for our asset management schedule. And again, I will bring a report back to council. So what this fund is a maximum of $50,000 with 80% funding. What that means is if they're to allocate $50,000 to the town of Greater Napanee, they would require us to have $12,500 that we would pitch in. So what I've put forward is a report that indicates between $12,500 and $52,300 for council to approve. What that is using those funds over the course of 2020 and 2021 to move forward the purchase of an asset management registry software, some asset management software that would work towards long-term financing for council's information, and as well some work order system. Now, within the work order system, there's a number of companies that put together these systems that the work order system speaks with the asset management system. What I mean, for example, if a road has a cracked ceiling program, it expands the life or extends the lifespan of that asset. There's a number of operating activities that therefore expand the asset, and therefore not quite as much money is needed to be put aside in the long term for asset management. The work order system is just that. It's a work order system where somebody running a crew can send out the orders to the various staff members on what they're going to be doing each day, and providing that staff member to say, take a picture, hit a button on the phone or a tablet to say that the work is done. But when it's integrated within the asset management system, it then takes those operating activities that increase the lifespan of that asset, moves it over into the asset management system. So when you're looking at long-term financing, you may be looking at a road that let's say it needs $500,000 and it's going to last 25 years. Well, when the operating activities merge over into it, you might end up getting 35 years. So it's going to be $500,000 spread over 35 years. Financially, it makes quite a bit of difference. So this proposal that we've asked an organization called Public Sector Digest to put together for us. This is a company that we have been assigned by the Municipal Finance Officers Association as part of a funding application that we sent in 2019 for a program called Amp It Up. We get a number of free hours from them to advance our asset management, and we asked them to provide us with a sample of an asset management and a work order system that we work together. And they've provided that, which is our basis for the funding application. However, having said that, when we go for the fund and when we're successful with the fund, we will come back and this will run through the procurement process as in an RFP process to go forward. This is not the software that we're going to purchase necessarily. It's just a typical example of what we're applying for. The reason that I'm spending so much time talking about it is that we could easily just apply for $50,000, put in our $12,500 and spread it out over the 2 years to get our asset management system. But we are a little bit behind at the town and would like to catch up. So therefore, we've got a proposal that instead of the 50 plus the 12.5 being 62,500, speaks to just over about $100,000 in order to help us get over the hump to get going to meet our legislative requirements in 2021. This proposal is for funding that's spread between 2020 and 2021. So we're looking at committing between $12,500 and just over $26,000 in 2020, which we've identified where our current council approved budget, where we would be pulling that from. So it's not an additional cost to the taxpayer. It's not an additional burden on our current budget. It would be within our budget. And then in the 2021 budget deliberations, the same amount would be identified in that budget. I do apologize for going on so long, but I hope I've provided enough information so that council fully understands exactly what we're applying for.
Thank you, Paul. Any questions or comments to Paul? I know it's an obligation of us to have our asset management plan in, and I know that Paul and the other treasurers in the area have done a lot of work to try and figure out what's the best way to handle it. So Paul has put forth a recommendation that we received for information, the information on it, and the council directs staff to apply for a grant apply for a grant opportunity from the federal Canadian Municipalities Municipal Asset Management Program for asset management systems and data enhancements. And be it therefore resolved that the town of Greater Napanee commits to conducting the following activities in its proposed as set out in the agenda. And it is very specific as to what we need to do. I don't think I need to read it all out to you. And further, except for the last one, be resolved that the town of Greater Napanee commits from its budget a minimum of $12,500 up to a maximum of $52,600 between 2020 and 2021 fiscal years. Council's wishes or questions, one or the other. Moved by Councillor McCormack, seconded by Deputy Mayor Kaiser. Questions, Councillor Johnson? And then I'll come to you, Deputy Mayor Kaiser.
Thank you, Mayor. Paul, how many companies are there that provide this type of software at a municipal level? Because it's very different than what happens for small business.
Yes, that's correct through the mayor, Councillor Johnson. There are a number of players. There's a number of engineering firms that do provide these services. There's a number of very small companies that also provide this type of software. However, as far as the big players go, there's 3 or 4 companies that operate. A couple of them operate, well, I should say, one of them, which is used as an example, is one that's a Canadian-based, Canadian-made software, which is making its way through Canada and in the States as well. There's another one that's out of Australia, which a Canadian company sells. But again, there's 3 or 4 companies that do provide an integrated, robust piece of software that kind of hits all the marks.
And Councillor Johnson, a follow-up, yeah?
I certainly support, you need to go ahead with this if we can get some funding to start it. I sat in on an asset management session at AMO last year, and it's very interesting, and we don't have any choices other than to move forward with this. When I would just suggest when it comes time to decide on which company you go with, to give a lot of weight to the company that offers a lot of tech support. It's not going to be an easy program to implement, and a lot of people are going to need a lot of training on it in order for it to run smoothly. So, and I will leave that in your capable hands. Thank you, sir.
Agreed.
Okay, anything further from council? I have, sorry, Deputy Mayor Kaiser.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly support doing this. It's obviously a legislative requirement, but I think, and I may be wrong in this, but I think that Greater Napanee has, it's certainly in the last 10 years and probably longer, been good managers of our assets. We tend not to be a needy community in that respect. I mean, we have a pretty big roads needs, but I think that's normal too. But this is a good move towards asset management. It's a good business practice to have, and to have these systems in place. So it's more than just spending the money to meet the obligation. it's spending the money to raise our level of performance, which I suppose in the end, the goal of the legislation is to reduce municipalities dependent on upper level funding, but at least to have a clear delineated plan of needs too, so that when the funding comes available, we're not throwing it around willy-nilly. Anyways, I just wanted to speak in support of it. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Pennell.
Through your worship, I'm in a mood tonight, so I apologize. Just one thing that you did happen to say, as you're reading this out to us, you made a statement that you did not have to read this to us. And I just want to make it clear to everybody that's watching or listening that no, you didn't have to read the whole thing, because we received the agenda, which is 655 pages for tonight, and we've already read the report. So just for clarity, when you said you didn't have to read it all out, we've already read it, because I don't want that out there that you're trying to sneak something by us. Thank you. Like I said, I'm in a mood. Thank you.
Thank you. I do have a mover and a seconder, I believe, between Councillor Pennell and Deputy Mayor Kaiser. Any further comments or questions? And I'm sure that I see Susan has popped up. Susan, have I done something wrong? I do have a mover and a seconder.
Yep, you're good.
We're good, thank you. I'm sure Paul will keep us apprised of this. It is important, it is expensive, but it's something that we need to do. And I also think with the work orders and so on, it's going to be something that'll be cost effective to us. So with that, if there's nothing further of council, I will call the question. All in favor of the entire motion? Showing none opposed, carried unanimously. Thank you very much, council. On to 5.11. Is everybody still okay? We are at 8:56. Does anybody need a momentary break? Nope, seeing none. We'll keep moving forward. Please raise your hand or let me know. I guess not raise your hand, but let me know if you need a break at any time, please. 5.11, Infrastructure Services, Part 8, On-Site Sewage System Programs Supplementary Report. There's Peter already with us. Peter, would you like to speak to this before it is discussed, and I can direct any questions that council may have for you?
Your worship, I have just a very quick summary of the report. Hopefully only take a minute or two of your time. Basically, the purpose of this supplementary report is to provide some additional information based upon some questions that were raised at the June 23rd council meeting. And we want to identify some specific examples of how environmental programs can help protect the town of Greater Napanee. Outcome tonight, staff are respectfully requesting direction from council this evening so that we have sufficient time to implement whatever resolution council so chooses prior to the existing KFLA public health contract expiring. So one thing I would like to make very clear when I talk about the environmental programs is what our approach would look like. So regardless of what environmental program we'd be proposing to launch in the community, it's a gentle transition into a proactive and sustainable approach. So when I say gentle, it's, you know, any programs that we do, they're built on cooperative working relationships with the community or business or stakeholders, so that it's a very cooperative approach. There's nothing heavy-handed in environmental programs at all unless things have really gone wrong, and that's an absolute last resort. Just a couple of highlights. So the staff recommendation, I just want to go over some of those, the highlights. So, you know, the recommendation that staff has in front of you, there's no adverse impact to taxation or user rates. Where staff are not asking for additional fleet. Council would gain a significant control over service levels, rates, fees. There'd be improved customer service and increased response times. And we would get to that enhanced one-stop shop. You know, we'd be reducing regulatory agencies and getting into that true proactive approach. With respect to environmental programs, there's kind of almost three avenues for the environmental programs. So there's, you know, there's the ones that really yield the capital savings, and then there's the ones that have the opportunity to provide annual operating revenue, And then there's the third portion of it, which is the protection of public health and the natural environment. So, you know, with respect to the ones that are geared towards capital savings, they're proven time and time again, they're proven to yield large scale capital savings, and they also protect critical infrastructure. So, you know, these types of programs can really help promote community growth because you're saving your assets. You're not having to you know, build that new water treatment plant, or, you have that landfill that can last for many more years yet to come. So, and, you know, so that's just one portion of it, the revenue portion of it. How we do with waste diversion can impact our annual grant revenue, you know, in a positive way, depending on how we're doing it. So, and with respect to risk, you know, I mentioned at the last report that was virtually negligible when compared to other town services. The data that we supplied in this report, you know, when you look at the numbers for the increase to our insurance premiums, I think that validates that statement. You know, when you're looking at an increase of less than $1,500 annually for liability and less than $800 annual for errors of emission insurance, that tells you the magnitude of the risk on that. It's very low. So, and with that, I'll turn it over back to you, Your Worship, for any questions.
Thank you, Peter, for the update. Any questions or comments from council? Nothing? If not, you have a recommendation before you that will receive for information the Infrastructure Services Development Services Part 8 On-Site Sewage Systems Program Supplementary Support, and further that council approve the staff recommendation of option 6 standalone with 1 additional staff, and further that council authorizes staff to draft all necessary bylaws required to assume direct responsibility for Part 8 services under the Ontario Building Code, and further that council authorizes staff to draft an appointment bylaw for sewage system inspectors with the same powers and duties in relation to sewage systems as the chief building officials have in respect of buildings, and further that council authorizes staff to draft a 2021 rates and fees bylaw for the provision of Part 8 services based upon Schedule A from the 2020 KF-LNA Public Health Bylaw number 7, and further that council authorizes staff to amend the existing joint services agreement with the Township of Stone Mills to include the mutual provision of Part 8 services on an on-call fee recovery basis. And further, the council authorizes the CAO to initiate a recruitment program for 1 full-time position that would include Part 8 responsibilities under the Ontario Building Code, as well as environmental program development, education, and outreach. Council's wishes. Moved by Deputy Mayor Kaiser, seconded by Councillor Pennell. Comments or questions at this time from staff? Seeing no hands up, I would call the question. All in favor of the motion? Councillor Richardson, did I see your hand up? Yes, you did. Okay, yep. Motion is carried unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Defoe, for that. We'll move on now to Community and Corporate Services, Campbell Craft Fund application. Mr. Zetterberg.
Your Worship, hi. Your Worship, one thing I'd like to add to the report that you have before you is that since we've acquired or started assuming these 2 cemeteries, we started collecting the names of people who would like to volunteer to help us with the management or governance of the cemeteries. One element that would come forward for council approval in the future would always be a fundraising portion. And obviously we have no idea. So when you're looking at the amount of money being asked for to support this grant application, the intent is that the $5,000 would be paid back through revenues, and that would include donations at some time in the future.
Okay. Thank you. Any questions of Mr. Zetterberg with this report? Any questions from council? Yeah, Councillor McCormack?
Just curious, Your Worship, how many people have come forward to say they'd like to volunteer?
Last time I checked, it was 12.
That's good, and there's been a lot of positives, so hopefully we'll even see more. Any further questions or comments? If not, you have a recommendation the council receive for information the Community and Corporate Services Campbell Craft Fund application report, and further the council approve $5,000 in support of the application for the $16,000 project toward a grave marker restoration at the Western Riverview and the Eastern Riverside cemeteries, and further the council authorize the mayor and the clerk to execute the necessary documents on behalf of the town. Any moved by Deputy Mayor Kaiser, seconded by Councillor Norrie. Any comments or questions? Getting lots of good comments on how we're starting to control those two cemeteries too. So it's nice to see them come out. And I know the farmers don't want dry weather, but it is nice not to have to be cutting the grass in there all the time. Thank you, Mr. Zetterberg. And with that, I'll call the question. All in favor of the motion? Motion is carried unanimously. Thank you. Community and Corporate Services request to remove town interest in property at 219 East Street. Susan, this is yours, please.
Yes, so through you, Your Worship, this is an old road allowance that was on an old plan that was closed by a judge's order around 100 years ago. When the property was converted to land titles, it's still showing up on the parcel register. And the request is just for council to authorize to have that subject interest of the municipality deleted from the parcel register.
Okay, questions of Susan? So
I just moved to make it so.
Yeah, okay. Moved by Deputy Mayor Kaiser, seconded by Councillor Pennell. All in favor of that motion? Motion is carried. Thank you very much, Susan. 5.14, Community and Corporate Services, Millhouse Yards, previous resolutions of council. I have to switch to my other screen here, sorry. Mr. Zetterberg, this is yours again, yeah?
Yes. I might have to ask Michael to jump in and help me if on any technical details, but there's two components to this. One is that there's a small, you'll see on the plan, it would be the second one in, I guess, there's a circled in red. There's a small portion within the original 16 acres of the Millhouse Yards. It was always the intent, I think, of council to sell the entire acreage, and this small pin was missed in the process. So this would be a housekeeping of conveyance to Selkirk. The second portion is that in a previous resolution of council agreed to separate an apartment block. You heard earlier this evening from Mr. Leclerc that it's the intent of the developer to build the apartment block as I think he called it pre-phase one. That separation did not take place at the time of sale. We're asking council to approve the separation now. It does require for us to take back that apartment block and then immediately transfer it back to an entity owned or Mr. Selkirk, and it has to be a different name. Otherwise, the PIN gets joined together. It's a process that happens automatically that we would try to avoid by transferring it back to him or in a different legal entity.
Questions of council for Brant on this? So, okay, Deputy Mayor Kaiser.
Sorry, I was having trouble jumping back and forth. I have a question about the automatic transfer back and the automatic reattaching. if we make an effort to separate and create a separate PIN number, and there's no effort, intent, or expression to join them back, why does it automatically go back? And my understanding of that comes from some investigations I did in case law in Ontario, where it's not automatic if there's no effort, intention, or expression to do so. So I just want a clarification on that. Is it something different about this situation that causes that?
I might have to ask Michael or Susan to answer that question on PIN numbers.
Through your worship, my understanding with regard to land titles is that when there are abutting property owners that are in the identical ownership on title, there's an automatic merger that happens. This happens when there is a husband and wife on title, and there's one of either the husband or wife passes away. They are no longer on title, and perhaps they owned an abutting lot with either the husband or wife on title. Those parcels then merge. There's no intention behind it, but it's something that we see here that happens quite often, and it's normally caught at a land sale when there's a searching of title that happens.
If I can continue quickly, I don't intend to create work or anything else. I feel that that's not on our staff's level, but at a higher level, that there's a failure in interpretation there. And because I have seen 4 cases in Ontario law that the judge ruled that in the absence of the intent or expression that it doesn't happen. And where, again, take the safe route, so I might as well shut up, but at the same time, it's a misinterpretation at a staff level municipality, at the municipality or at any municipality, that it's automatic, because if 2 PIN numbers exist, it's 2 properties. I have 17 properties all touching one another, and they're all 17 different properties, and they're all in the same name. That's just my opinion. Take the safe route by all means. I on a point, I disagree.
Okay, so anything further from council? I just want to ask a couple of questions for clarification here, and clarification not just for us, but everybody else that's out there. This is a housekeeping matter of a PIN number that was left out when the lands were transferred, maybe even in the mix-up when we took the plan of subdivision off, that it remained as a separate PIN. We're not giving away land. We are not. We are not. It isn't a piece of land that we declare surplus and just give to someone. It is a housekeeping matter to make sure that they can go ahead and proceed with this subdivision. And if I've said anything wrong there, I just want to know whether I'm right, because I find this confusing as well. So this is simply just to clear up a PIN that was missed, which was intended to be within the total sale that Mr. Selkirk bought.
Your worship, that's correct.
Good. Okay. Thought so, but I wasn't absolutely sure. Anything further from council? If not, you have a recommendation before you. Council, your wishes? Moved by Deputy Mayor Kaiser, seconded by Councillor Richardson. All in favor of that motion? Motion is carried. Thank you very much, Brant, for that. Okay, whoops, lost my agenda. So 5.15, which was the exception in our service area updates, is that this would be included. Brant, you're speaking to this one too?
Yes, I'll start off. And again, if there's anything technical, I'm sure that Michael will jump in.
Thank
you. Council had seen the opinion of value of this property come forward at a previous meeting. The intent is to convey the property to ABNA Investments Ltd to complete the Gibbard District development, or some of the lands needed, in exchange for an appropriate portion to the town. That portion that would be transferred to the town will protect our interests on the gate at the top of the dam. And it's my understanding that it will also complete the portion of the, there's the walkway or the path along the waterfront. Some of that would then be transferred to the town. But the, if you recall the drawings from earlier this evening with the newer drawings, the proportion that the town owns right now overlaps where they want to put one of the underground parking garages.
Okay, any questions for Mr. Zetterberg on this? Lots of housekeeping items tonight to try and get through to move things forward. So you do have a recommendation before you. Council's wishes, if there are no questions. Councillor Pennell?
Sorry, I was just going to move it.
Moved by Councillor Pennell, seconded by Councillor Johnson. Any further comments or questions? If not, all in favor of the motion? Motion is carried unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Zetterberg. Community and Corporate Services, Community Events Proposal to Implement Revised Summer Programming. Mr. Zetterberg.
Fairly straightforward. Council had approved a summer programs earlier in the year, of course, that were put on hold. Now that we're into stage 3, there is an opportunity to help out some of the arts community and have some of the music come back to the market. And also Conservation Park. It's obviously a reduced budget and a reduced schedule. But another thing that council had approved earlier in the year was the movie in the park. And we would like to proceed with that, with the proper protocols and distancing restrictions in place.
Any questions or comments for Mr. Zetterberg? Yep, Councillor McCormack.
Are we going to have a Christmas parade this year?
We're going to have Christmas?
Well, so far we're planning on it, so.
Okay.
No, that's a good question, because some around us, believe it or not, have canceled it. Holy moly. We'll try and freeze it out by then. So if there are no comments or questions, I'm just glad to see something go ahead. I think it gives us a little light at the end of the tunnel. I did talk to Lindsay about what was being planned, and I personally think that it's great. Council's wishes. Moved by Deputy Mayor Kaiser, seconded by Councillor McCormack. We'll all look forward to it and all support it, or by going to it, socially distanced. All in favor of the motion? Motion is carried unanimously. Thank you. On to the encroachment agreement at 137 Thomas Street. Susan, is this one yours?
Yes.
Okay,
So,
thank you.
yeah, it's just an encroachment for a building that's on some easement lands for town infrastructure. So it's just a formality to have the encroachment agreement in place.
Yeah. Okay. So again, you have a recommendation, Mr. Councillor Pennell.
Yes, through Mayor, I just have a question. I'm quite familiar with this property. I'm quite familiar with the easements that go along with it. I'm just wondering though, is this lease agreement need to be done every time that there's a new owner, or is there something that can just be put on title?
Typically with a license agreement for an encroachment, it's with the property owner. So it's redone every time the property changes hands.
Fantastic, thank you.
Okay, anything further? If not, you have a recommendation to authorize to enter into a license agreement with the owners at 137 Thomas, and further that council authorize the mayor and the clerk to execute the agreement on behalf of the town. Moved by Councillor Pennell, seconded by Councillor McCormack. With no further discussion, I'll call the question. All in favor of the motion? Motion is carried unanimously. Thank you. We are now on to bylaws. bylaw number 2020-0039 to appoint chief building official and to repeal bylaw number 0230. First, second, and third reading. Moved by Deputy Mayor Kaiser, seconded by Councillor Pennell. All in favor of that motion, or sorry, in favor of the motion is carried. Bylaw number 2020-0040 to repeal bylaw number 2020-0018, delegation of authority during the COVID state of emergency. I would like to speak to this first, just something that we might consider. Is during the delegation of authority, and I know that Michael's there, and I'm going to kind of put him on the spot, and we might have to have Ray come in here too. Delegation of authority during the COVID-19 state of emergency for, I guess, what you think of as purposes as to what staff can do. But I guess I'd like to hear from Michael as to his opinion. And if I'm putting him on the spot and he doesn't want to do this, what the building department has been able to do. Nothing which is brought forward to us tonight, but just consent applications for severances and so on that would come forward to us that we wouldn't have a question on because they would all be well documented. I don't know whether council would consider, and this is just a question to you, it's not even a request, but with the way that things are happening so rapidly, would we be wise, and I would like some discussion on this, would we be wise to leave that in the capable hands for severances and so on? It can't be variances, it can't be plans of subdivision, it can't be rezoning, it can't be official plan amendments, but it could be straight severances. They do it for building permits now. I'd like to hear from Michael first, or council first, if you wish, to see if that might not be something to leave in place. Many municipalities have it in place on a full-time basis, and I'm not so sure that I want to go to that, but consent applications, would that be something that during the state of emergency that we leave in place? Just thoughts after talking to some other municipalities. Michael, would you like to speak to that as to how it frees up the process somewhat?
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, staff have noticed a very a greater customer service approach actually with this in place. So processing timelines have drastically reduced. You know, we normally have to plan for an agenda to be published a week prior. You know, then there's a delay in that, and there's the decision meeting, following up with notices of decision being sent out. There's quite a number of weeks that have been able to be eliminated from the standard process, just with this delegation of authority. So staff have thought it's been working quite well, and applicants have been quite impressed actually too with the turnaround times for processing of such applications.
And one more question that I'd like to ask you, is it taking any opportunity for people that want to object to severances or anything? Is it taking the opportunity away from them? Is there a downside to doing this?
Your Worship, the notices that go out for all severances have been going out the same. So publishing notices in the paper. Within that notice, we are saying staff include a note that says, if there is a dispute that cannot be resolved with regard to the consent applications, the application will be turned to the Committee of Adjustment for final decision. So if there are no questions, concerns from the public, we've been processing the application as normal under delegated authority. However, if anybody were to come forward and have a concern or something that could not be addressed, that would then be turned over to the committee. However, we just have not come upon that circumstance yet. So that was a policy that staff did put in place for those applications.
Yeah, and I just want to point out to council, this is nothing that staff was aware that I was even going to bring up tonight. I had not discussed it with anyone, but when I was doing some reading and saw what other municipalities were leaving in place, I thought it would give us the option to do it. But I'm happy to hear some comments on what people might think about it, please. Councillor Pennell.
Thank you, Worship. I understand. I'm just looking forward to list. There was quite a few that were done during the state of emergency, I believe. And, 99.9% of the time we take staff recommendation on this anyway. There has been a couple times where things haven't gone through. But I certainly do not want to lose knowledge. I want, if this was going to be done, I would like to have a letter or something, a quick email saying that this has been consented to. And then that will give us a heads up too, like if we have to come in and do a bylaw, that we know what we're talking about. So I don't see much of an issue of continuing the same way as long as we're notified that has been done.
Yeah. Deputy Mayor Kaiser.
Absolute 100% echo what Councillor Pennell just said. I think if the application, once the application is received, that's the communication point that we need to have, just in case we know of anything. As councillors and you and I, we're out talking to residents all the time, that we do have some knowledge, and maybe we might have an opportunity then to ensure that interests are covered. So I agree, 99.9% of the time they're going to go and we're going to consent, but every once in a while we should have some opportunity. We should preserve that level of oversight minimally. And if that's the opportunity that just an application has been received, I'd like to see those emails flying around. I hope that's not too much of an inconvenience to ask for that.
Anything further from Michael? Yes, I'll go to Councillor Richardson and let him make his comment, and then I'll come back to you, Michael. Councillor Richardson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I put this forward at the last meeting because I don't think that there's it's not a big issue. I don't believe it has been abused, but if we're going to suggest that we're going to change this, maybe what should happen is it should be brought to us and given us an opportunity to think about it as opposed to just be brought up at this point. I'm going to stick to the guns on this and say that there's absolutely no reason why we can't get rid of the delegation of authority right now. If I'm not mistaken, should any of this be done through a qualified, as a qualified planner? Like, does any of that have anything to do with it being a qualified planner? And is there any opportunity down the road for it to be challenged?
What do you mean by qualified plan?
Qualified planner? Do we have anybody on staff that is a qualified planner?
Oh, I see, planner. Okay, no, sorry. All I heard was plan. So I'll let Michael speak to that. And it doesn't have to be tonight. It's just something that I thought if we wanted to look at it. Michael, go ahead, please.
So the how committee of adjustment applications are processed, were processed pre-COVID. There was a recommendation provided by the planning department staff. We do not have registered professional planners on staff. However, the town has been operating in that manner for some time. It's been working quite well. The committee of adjustment makes the final decision. If the delegated authority were to stay in place, and if there were a challenge, then that's when the town would be able to retain the services of a registered professional planner to defend any appeal that may be made to the LPAT. So I don't really have an answer, I guess a direct answer as to whether that would be an issue at this time. However, the town would be able to retain such services if required in the event of an appeal on any decision that is made.
Okay, Councillor Richardson, did you want to follow up?
So really, I mean, if we get rid of the delegation of authority tonight, in the future, if somebody wants to bring something forward to us to suggest that this process can be streamlined somewhere else, we can have that done somewhere in the future.
Certainly we could, and I apologize too. This is just something that came across my desk this afternoon. and for popping it on you. It certainly started a conversation as to how we might deal with it. And maybe it is something that we could ask staff when they haven't got quite so much on the go. I guess maybe from a customer service point of view, I was looking at it more that anything that we can streamline, still do properly, stay safe, stay within the boundaries, but not lose touch with. And I really take to heart what both Councillor Pennell and Deputy Mayor Kaiser have said as well, because the one way that you really learn about the planning and our development services is sitting on the Committee of Adjustments. There's something learned in every one of those meetings. So it was simply a suggestion I wanted to put forward. Any further comment, Deputy Mayor Kaiser?
I would propose that we leave it as it's written tonight, but also consider or have staff consider and propose a policy going forward that would streamline the customer service on consent applications. So Well, I'll make the motion with that addition.
Okay, now Susan, can we make a motion when we're trying to do a bylaw here?
Oh, well then just make the bylaw. We'll consider that in the future.
Okay, we'll put that on as an action plan, but yeah, I think we've got to stick with the bylaw, not muddy the waters. But I do think, and I'm glad that if somebody spoke to this, because I wasn't wanting to throw something out, but I didn't want us not to consider it. And if it's something in the future, then maybe it'll work. Okay, so bylaw number 2020-040 to repeal bylaw number 2020-0018A, delegation of authority during COVID-19 state of emergency. First, second, and third reading. Moved by Councillor Richardson, seconded by Councillor McCormack. Further comments or questions? All in favor? Motion is carried unanimously. Thank you. Bylaw 2020-0041 to adopt conditions of employment for non-union employees. First, second, and third reading. Moved by Deputy Mayor Kaiser, seconded by Councillor Norrie. Comments or questions? All in favor of that motion? Motion is carried. Thank you. Bylaw number 2020-0042 to appoint building and plumbing inspector and property standards officer John Ray. First, second, and third reading. Councillor McCormack, seconded by Councillor Johnson. All in favor of that? Motion is carried unanimously. Thank you. Bylaw number 2020-0043 to authorize the execution of a volunteer association agreement. First, second, and third reading. Deputy Mayor. I'm sorry.
For this bylaw, just on the second page, clause 201.
I'm sorry.
There is a typographical error.
Yeah.
Clause 201, the 2022 rate increase should say 2.25. The figures just got transposed. If we could pass as amended.
Yeah, pass them as amended. And that's, I'm going back to which one am I doing here? Pass as amended, and that is the 2020-0041. 43, okay. Oh, sorry, 0043.
Thank you.
I'm working from my iPad on this now, so, okay, as amended, first, second, and third reading. And did I have a mover and a seconder? Councillor, I do?
No, not yet.
Okay, Councillor Richardson, Councillor Pennell, all in favor of that motion as amended? Carried unanimously. Any statements by members this evening? Nope. Oh, yep, Councillor Norrie.
Thank you. Just quickly, you may have heard about a complaint I'm working on Simcoe Street. And it may sound in the outset silly, feeding of seagulls, but it's been going on for years to the point where the mess is phenomenal. Now we have rats in the area. So I've been doing some digging. First of all, Bylaw Officer Brent Kelly and myself met with some of the residents to actually see some of this. And this has been going on for 10 years, almost to a neighborhood harassment, it seems to be. So I've submitted to staff, first of all, a Hamilton bylaw in regards to this, not necessarily to be enforced all the time, but as a tool. So I'm waiting to hear back that maybe we could have something such as this. I know the residents are really concerned up in arms. So then we decided to have a public awareness. So that staff has put out an email or on the town website and are going to do a video. But also 2 days ago, they gave me this, a pamphlet, which I'll be delivering to, the great job they did. I'll be delivering 50 or 60 to residents and knocking on doors to educate them, because it's getting rather dirty in this nice area. And then since then, in the area of Dundas and the Centre, I'm getting a similar complaint about the seagulls and the mess. So this bylaw, I really hope staff will look at it seriously. And if they want some help, I've given them the whole thing because it would be a very good tool, and it seems to be growing in the mess. And in this pamphlet, which if you look online, you can see is explaining to everybody dirty it can get. And then also today I met with the property standards group and come up with an idea that anytime they have a complaint, instead of calling staff, just send it to me and I will forward it through our complaint procedure, and I'll be the contact person. So hopefully, just to keep, flow of communication happening. I just want to put that out to everybody. And so if you hear something about the birds, you know what it's about. Thank you.
Very much, Councillor Norrie. Anything further in statements by members? No. Seeing none, just nice to be going into stage 3 and moving forward carefully, 1 foot in front of the other, but we've still got to be extremely cautious. And with no further, I would call for a motion to go into closed session, that we resolve into closed session in order to discuss the following matters. First, to adopt closed session minutes from meetings dated June 23rd, June 30th, and July the 7th. Secondly, 2 matters regarding potential litigation and identifiable individuals, prospective disposition of land, non-union employee negotiations and labor relations, and finally, a matter regarding identifiable individuals. Moved by Councillor Pennell, seconded by Councillor McCormack. All in favor of that motion? Motion is carried. Thank you very much. We will see you shortly.